Subscribing to this channel provides you regular access to professional advice on independent operators. If you want to support us, like, share, and turn on that notification.
Welcome to Making Your Miles Count Production, an educational program to all Canadian lease owner-operators with your host, Robert Scaper.
Well, welcome to the Make Your Miles Count podcast, and today we have Bill Cameron, the author of the book, So You Want to Own Your Own Trucking Company. And we're going to be discussing the book a little bit, and hopefully we can help some people think a little bit more clearly about the next steps that they may or may not take in their career as a truck driver. Maybe first of all, you can tell us a little bit about how you got into the trucking industry in the first place.
Yeah, I wasn't maybe in my mid-20s, I guess, before I finally got into it. I tried a few other little career choices that just never came together the way I had hoped. Started working for some local construction companies. Wasn't as handy with the equipment as I would have liked to be, but the trucks worked okay. So just kind of moved up from there. Learned the old-fashioned way. You start off-road and just keep getting into a larger and larger truck every couple of months until the next thing you know, you've got a lot of axles behind a tractor going down the highway. I tried the owner-operator thing briefly, found out what I liked and didn't like. And after a few years back at construction, then we started up our own company. I've never been the type that really wanted to work for somebody else for any period of time. So that was always...
Get your own running rights?
Pardon me?
What year did you get your own running rights?
It would have been 99.
99. Okay, yeah. So just when deregulation came in.
Finally, yeah, just a few years before that, everybody was having trouble.
Yeah. So okay, all right, cool. So did you have any lanes and loops put together, or did you have one customer or a bunch of customers, or what was your plan?
Well, the big thing was to I kind of leaned on some of the areas from the brief time as an owner operator, seeing where the most freight went to and came back from. I never had any urge to drive any distance because this was never my chosen career in the first place. So the 500 or 600 mile radius suited me fine. There seemed to be a lot of that kind of work because a lot of the long timers, they didn't like that. It was too much labor, loading and unloading every day. They wanted to load it up, drive for 3 days. So the shorter stuff, when I first started, it was actually pretty plentiful. Sure. We had a couple of local hardwood flooring plants that set us up with their suppliers because we're a little over 100 miles north of Toronto. None of the big trucking companies wanted to come here. Oh, well, I do. It's home. So that worked really well. We got acquainted with them, and it kind of fell together pretty good, really. It fell together easier than it does for a lot of people.
Sure. So you had a little bit of an inroad in the construction industry, and that was your contacts, or did you just cultivate the construction industry?
No, the construction company actually had nothing to do with this at all. I just started asking some questions around while I was waiting for the operating authorities to come through, and it was a leap of faith. An underfinanced leap of faith that nobody in their right mind would take nowadays. And I'm not sure I was really doing the right thing doing it then either, but it worked. Pretty stubborn, pretty determined. It happened.
Sure. So did you start out flat deck, dry van, reefer? What was your starting out?
Yeah, flatbed. I learned pretty quickly. I did a little bit of both. In the brief time as an owner operator, really didn't like the van work. It seemed like, well, not only the rates were nowhere close to what flatbed freight was. It seemed if there was ever a time you were going to sit for 8 or 9 hours, either waiting for a load or waiting to be loaded, it was going to be with the van, not the flatbed. I'm not patient that way. So I stuck with the flatbeds. And honestly, it's so easy to get out of shape in this business. You sit way too much. You don't eat right. At least with the flatbed, I had something to do at either end, so it worked a little better.
Sure, right on. Okay,
but money was the prime motivator.
So how long were you did you have your own company before you started writing articles? Because a lot of this is basically you wrote articles for, what was it?
Truck news.
Truck News.
Yeah. Probably better than 10 years.
So you did 10 years, and then you said, hey, I got to write an article or something.
Yeah, I wrote the odd letter to the editor, and then finally I sent him just a private email, not a letter to the editor, and I said, you have nobody writing in that magazine that you've got the odd driver or owner operator that will put in an opinion piece. You've got nobody writing that actually has started a company from scratch, owns the company, still driving the truck. Not the big fleets. I mean, those guys breathe different air than us smaller guys do. But I said, you're not represented at all of the smaller fleets and how to get there. So they had me write a sample column. I think I went overboard and wrote 3 samples and sent it in, and he said, yeah, okay, we can do this.
Okay, so what did you focus on when you first started writing?
Just the new realities of because honestly, and I don't mean this as a slam to the magazines, but they have nobody at any magazine really that is knee deep in the industry as a small operator that's willing to actually tell the truth about how this works. I remember years ago, before I ever thought of buying the first truck, you would read those magazines and there was some good information in them. Now it's not so much, because all their information comes from the CEOs and managers of large fleets, because people at these magazines have never actually, they may drive a new truck for a road test or something, but they don't physically work in the industry. Yeah. They're taking all their news secondhand. And if you're just starting off and you're looking for information how to do it, other than obviously your books on the financial side of things, other than that, there's nothing out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Canada has well over 10,000 trucking companies just in our country. And the vast majority of them are small companies. Anywhere from 1 to 10 trucks. And there are lots of them. And it's really, I actually appreciate it, because in the industry itself, a lot of the big carriers get the publicity and they get their opinions, and they push their agendas, good or bad. But realistically, the vast majority of actual freight that's moved actually is moved by small carriers. And there's lots of them. One thing I've learned about the trucking industry, and that is what's called diseconomies of scale, which means if you're looking for a return on your investment, you actually get a higher return on your investment when you're a small company.
Yeah.
And the bigger you get, your margins get smaller and smaller and smaller. Yes, you may end up with millions of dollars, but comparatively wise, the margins get smaller and smaller. Like I talked to one fleet owner, was a number of years ago now, and had, I don't know, 300 trucks or so, and they were operating anywhere from 1.25 to 1.25 to 1.5 cents per mile. That's what their margins were. Like, that's what their profit was. Small little itty bitty. And when you look at it and you talk to these guys who have 1, 2, 5 trucks, their overhead is next to nothing. Like, sometimes they maybe have a yard in the back of their house or something like that they put trucks on, and their wife dispatches out of their basement. There's a lot of guys like that, and those guys have next to no administration, and they can have higher margins than anybody else. And that's why, especially now when we're looking at very low freight rates right now, and it's been like that for quite some time, a lot of the big guys going, how in the world is anybody managing? How in the world is, and complaining like crazy. Well, goodness sakes, man, you got $20 million yard in Mississauga or something like that. You got to pay for that somehow, you know. There is a diseconomies of scale in the trucking industry, which is it sounds a little counterintuitive, but realistically, in order for you to get really big, you have to have administration, and it's not that you know, big companies are bad or anything like that. That's just one feature of the trucking industry, and it's not just in Canada; it's in the United States too. In there.
Well, and look at how bad that business model turned out in 08 during the recession. I mean, there wasn't any small guys going under. It was all the big ones, because with that tiny itty bitty little profit margin, they relied on volume. You
Yeah.
take the volume away, now what?
Yeah. 2009 was brutal. Like 8 and 9 was just like death. I had a stack of unbelievable, how do I say, theft off my clients, you know, like, you know, they take money off of statements from thin air. You know, their logic was nowhere near anything, but nobody ever really complained about it for the simple reason that nobody was hiring.
No.
Nobody was hiring, and so you just, you know, dug a hole, put a helmet on, and survived till 2010, and then it rebounded some or so. But that is the industry is it's very susceptible to the ups and downs. That's for sure. Okay, so let's talk about your book. How many articles? How many years were you writing before you actually compiled it into the book?
About 4.5 years, I think, somewhere in there. And I actually didn't write the book until I had finished writing the column.
Okay.
I quit writing the column because I had sold off all the equipment that did the cross-border work. No more employees, no more owner-operators. It was just me. I didn't cross the border anymore. And I said, you know, there's a lot of bad information being passed in this industry. I don't want to be a source of it. I'm not deep into the subjects that matter to people anymore. It's not something I have to deal with.
Started with one truck, and then you grew to what size?
9.
Nine trucks.
At the peak, yeah.
At the peak. And did you specialize in any particular field? Or
we always had one lone dry van hanging around, but other than that, it was always flatbeds. At one time, it was almost half of the trucks did contracted work just within Ontario, job site work. Somewhat specialized, but not horribly. And then, yeah, we leaned towards a lot of the same commodities, you know, hardwood lumber, softwood lumber, brick, building materials primarily. Don't like going to steel mills for the same reasons I don't like pulling a van. I don't like hanging around the same piece of property for 8 hours.
Sure. So. Okay. Well, let's go through the outline of your book. The first chapter is getting started, and talk about financial business plan. What inspired you to start there?
Well, a lot of people think that it's as easy as, well, I've been driving a truck forever. Maybe I already own a truck. I'll just start up my own business, because I don't think we ever hired an owner operator that didn't think he could run the place better than we could. Too many of them go into business with that attitude, and 6 months later, they've got their tail between their legs looking for their job back. Yeah. It's just, there's a lot of realities that they don't tell you about that people don't realize, like, you know, the time it takes to get your authorities in place and the cost of doing that. And you know, some guys will even make the mistake of, well, I've been pulling a van for X number of years, but I see the flatbed guys are making more money, so I'll dive into that. No, you don't know what you're doing over there. Don't do that.
Different fish.
Yeah, I just wanted to spell out the realities of how you actually start up on your own. And
what do you suggest people have in reserves, cash reserves?
Well, that's changed a lot from when I wrote the book. I know that, and that's only 7 years, not even 7 years. Honestly, especially with the newer equipment being as reliable as we know it can be, I don't honestly know if 20,000 is enough. That's after you've got, all your plates, insurance, everything covered for the first 3 months. To still have 20 grand sitting aside, realistically, to get into this, even if you already own the truck, to be safe, you either need a line of credit, which nobody wants to give you right out of the box,
Mm.
or about probably 40, 50,000. Just,
Yeah.
Most places pay 30 days is quick pay. Some of them are later. You got to pay a lot of tolls, buy a lot of fuel, and make a couple insurance payments before you get any of your money back.
Yeah.
And it takes so much money to get that cycle started.
I had a client. It reminds me of I had a client who went out, got his own running rights, and got everything all going together, and went out and drove for 3 weeks, and then ran out of cash, and he just
Yeah.
put the truck at home, waiting for receivables to come in, pay his fuel, so he can get back out on the road again. So there was a 1 week delay, and they got him back out on the road again, and he sort of went like that. And within a couple of months, like, he was on the road, like, he had a positive cash flow, so he could do it. But he was undercapitalized
Yeah.
for sure when he first started, even from a credit perspective, and that's unfortunate. And because you got some really good operators out there but they just don't know the real costs associated with it. I agree with you. I'd say about 50,000 if you own your own truck.
Yeah.
If you don't own your own truck and you have payments, you should have 6 months worth of payments on the side, just in case. And depending on the age of the truck and potential maintenance issues, should have another 20, 30 in there as well, because cash flow, it can vary quite a bit from one industry to the other. I know I have a friend who's heavy into the construction, and the entire construction industry works on somewhere between 60 and 90-day turnover period of cash, because everybody sort of pays their bills with other people's money in the construction industry. Other industries can pay within 15, 20 days. It's a lot. Your customer base can be so diverse that all of a sudden, one person has no problem at all, and the next person, is park the truck at home until he waits for the receivables to come in.
But we were luckier than we should have expected to be. A couple of the customers we had initially, whatever you invoice them Friday night, that check would be in your hand by Tuesday or Wednesday the following week. And then there were others that were 15 days. If you've got half of them that fall into that category, they float the other ones that are the 45-day to 60-day, and you can kind of keep going. It still means the first 3 months are pretty tight, but it's at least doable.
Yes.
And
what is the and I actually don't know this that much. What is the turnover on fuel? Like, if you get a card from a particular, whatever, it's Shell, Esso, Husky, whatever it is in Canada, wherever you get your card, do you have to pay that weekly, or do you negotiate a difference? What or does that change?
Another disadvantage of being the small operator, you can't negotiate it. They tell you when you're going to pay. The cards that we had, which worked pretty much every major truck stop, we had to pay them every week.
Yeah.
Now the local supplier, anything we can top up there, that was 30 days. So that helped. You always leave home full and put in just enough away from home to get back home full and drag it out. But yeah, I think most cards for a small trucking company are weekly.
Yeah, that's so you have to have lots of cash.
Well, for instance, I mean, if you're doing, let's say even 2,500 miles a week, at 6.5 miles a gallon, I guess that's realistic this time of year. You're into what's that, about 1,500 liters? Well, that's $2,500 a week that you have to come up with just to keep that thing rolling. And if you get too many weeks of that before you get money coming in, that's a ton of money.
That's 10 grand just on fuel alone. If you're on a 30-day turnover on there, and
Per truck. If you have 2 or 3 of them, and it's
yeah,
and 800 a month roughly for insurance for each truck. I mean, the guys that scoff when you tell them how much it takes to start in business, you start rolling those numbers at them and you see their eyes glaze over, and they think maybe they don't want to do this anymore.
yeah, it is
But
scary.
I've always said the manufacturers should not be allowed to have their own finance division to sell trucks, because with them, they talk to you for a few minutes, they see what kind of money you can make, and they'll make the payments fit you. At no point of that did you have to show anybody that you had the slightest clue how to run a business. You should have to do a formal, thorough business plan before anybody will sell you anything. And then at least you show you've got some understanding of the mechanics of where the money comes and goes from.
The vast majority, and I was talking to a guy, well, this was a number of years ago again, but I said the vast majority of truck ownerships, like guys who own trucking companies, almost all of them, at least the medium to larger ones, they started out as load brokers rather than drivers.
Yeah.
It seems like the foot in the door is you need to see where your customers are. See customer base. You need to be able to manage that, and the trucks are less of a manage in there, and that's from an accounting perspective to independent operators who sometimes go out and get their own running rights. That's where I have to try and help guys understand. Just because you know how to drive a truck does not mean you know how to manage the cash flow of 1, 2, 3 plus trucks. That is maintenance issues. Yes, you can. That's only one small part of the company, and you have to reel in some good paying freight, develop great relationships, and that's more along the lines of like the freight, like the load brokering guys, these small guys who used to be. I don't know if there's any small load brokering guys around anymore, but there was a lot of guys who did load brokering for quite a while, and then eventually they got ticked off and they went out and got their own trucks. That was that's a lot of what ends up happening or so. But truck drivers, some of them though are very, very talented with people too, and but usually not very many of them. About probably only a quarter of the ones that think they can make it. That's for sure. So yeah, okay. Well, financial business plan. Did you do a lot of your own should I say accounting and invoicing and stuff like that, or did you?
We did everything.
You did everything, eh?
Invoicing, fuel tax, the whole 9 yards. We paid somebody that knows what they're doing to get the authorities, because I just had this bad feeling if I try to do it, there's going to be one little piece of the puzzle that I miss. So it's better to just pay them to do it. You've got everything. But after that, whether it's office repairs or anything, you do whatever you're capable of doing yourself, do it.
All right. Okay. Well, that's the getting started. Anything else in the getting started chapter that springs to mind?
Not really. Just a lot of money up front. That's all. and it's tough to do that now.
Yeah.
It's
a lot of guys go line of credit, and credit cards up the yin yang and stuff like this,
Yeah. They are last resort emergency funds only, is all a credit card is.
It is. It scares the crackers out of me. Like like some of them, and I actually seen some guys go in with next to nothing and just credit cards like crazy, and 18 months later, do well. Like but they got into the industry, it seems like right at the right time, and some of it is just straight luck where they are, and they get into it. Actually, now that I think about it, that particular guy who got into it and did well within 18 months, about 3 years later, he actually wrapped the whole thing up because he got scared of the huge numbers that he was turning over. He thought and his wife thought they were going to lose their house because they were turning over, $250,000 a month. And that scared his wife. Like back at that time, their house wasn't even worth $250,000. And his wife said, "Are you kidding? Like all you have to do is one or two mistakes and wham, and we're done." And so
Well, I guess
he could have made a good go of it. I think he was operating pretty good before that, but yeah, it gets very intimidating. There's a lot of moving parts, and some of those parts can fly apart at any given time. You never know.
and that kind of leads into the one other thing that I had in the getting started chapter was I don't think you'll disagree with this. Incorporate. There's always that argument: do you incorporate or not? The liability in this industry, you do not want your personal name attached. We were incorporated 6 months before the operating authorities even came through. Just to me, that was a priority.
That's one thing I've noticed too. Like some people just jump right in and get their authorities, and then they get it under their own personal name.
Yeah,
that's a big mistake.
Yep.
because then you say, well, okay, now I'm going to go and incorporate, and you can't transfer your authorities from yourself personally to your corporation, not without starting right all over again. No, that's some of the little tricks on there. You got to incorporate first. That's the first, and then get your incorporation to get the running rights.
Yeah.
But I've seen it. I've seen probably 2 or 3 guys. So yeah, I got my own running rights under my own personal name. Ooh, what are you doing? Because everything you can't undo that.
No.
The other thing has to do with within 6 months you get a logbook audit, right? Maybe it wasn't at that time, but it's pretty standard now.
Yeah.
That and you go through, and on all the DOT is looking for is just that you're keeping track and doing everything according to standards. If you have to get your own running rights all over again, well, you got to go through all that process all over again. Reclassify, re-qualify everything. You just start from scratch again.
Just a lot of expense and a little just pay me now, pay me later, like the old oil filter commercial used to say. Well, do it first.
There you go. The next chapter, location. That's choose where your head office is based on margin. That's what I have one sentence for that chapter. What was your focus on that chapter?
Well, a lot of people think we need to be set up near a big city. In my case, why are you 100 and some miles north of Toronto instead of Toronto? Well, real estate costs 10 times as much in Toronto. Everybody else wants the driving staff down there. And since there's so much industry down there, because you're right near a major highway, freight rates are probably pretty bad. And chances are good you have at least a passing acquaintance with some potential customers if you stick with your own home area to line up the customers. So that was the way we leaned. The only exception to that, we had some customers in the Toronto area because at least half the freight we brought back came to Toronto. So if you load at home, go to the States, come back to Toronto, then reload at the Toronto area customer to go out again, and then get a load home, you kill a lot of empty miles, and it gets you home when you want to get home.
Did you deadhead then from, say, Toronto to home?
If we had to, yeah. It was living where we do. It's the cost of doing business. We have very little industry up here, so you take what you get to get you home. But
where were your
or to get out?
Were they where you were, or in Toronto area?
Most of our outbound customers were within 40 miles of home.
Oh, okay.
And probably half of our inbound freight was within 30.
Okay.
Um,
Where
so
were
we
your
just,
employees though? Like, were your employees local guys?
yeah, pretty much. Probably. We had one guy, found out later why he came to us. He was from probably 150 miles away
Hmm.
because he was just a hot mess. Nobody else would hire him. We found that out real fast. But everybody else was, probably within 30 miles of here, 30, 40 miles. Um, and it's hard to hire somebody at first because you have no track record. After you get some guys on the road, make sure you're taking care of them properly. And then word gets around, people see more equipment with your name on it, then they start to pay some attention.
Yeah.
And
There are a fair bit of carriers that position themselves from a location perspective around one primary customer, for instance.
mhm,
Like I'm thinking of lumber hauling, for pulp mills and stuff like this. And so they have
mhm.
one customer or two customers, and they do backhaul or something like along that lines. I know there's a fair bit of that. That's more maybe a little bit localized freight and the like. Um, that's or like the automobile industry, somebody's in Oshawa or something like that, and they're going
Yeah,
to whatever, it's a little bit along that lines, but that tends to grow to larger amount of trucks. Uh, if you're linked with a big supplier and stuff like that. What
that's
is
the trouble.
the mix of your customers? Did you deal with them directly or through load brokers, or what was your mix?
Mostly directly. There is the odd place, and I'd mentioned this later on in the book too, that some places they either move such a volume of freight that they don't want to deal with 25 different trucking companies on a daily basis. They deal with 5 load brokers and say, here, you guys get 50 loads, the other guy gets 50 loads, deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
Cases like that, they're going to pay roughly what you'd charge anyway, and you can't have that freight unless you go through them.
Yeah.
And so we use load brokers a little bit that way, and we
You know the
also
percentage, like
percentage
80% your own and 20% load brokering, or
70 to 80 depending on the season was our own.
okay.
um, Living where we do and dealing with building materials, the wintertime did slow down into certain areas or from certain areas, so that would knock your percentage off. But overall, probably 70 to 80 was our own freight. And that's easier to do when you stick primarily with the 600-mile radius like we did. You start going from here to California
Mm,
once a month. You're
yeah,
not going to line up your own customers for that, never, because you're just not there often enough to offer them any level of service.
sure. All right. So any other topics under location, or
Well, not really, just the price of real estate and the fact that you know what businesses are there, and maybe people know you personally. They're more apt to work for you,
yeah.
or in some cases more apt not to, but hopefully
Yeah.
more apt to.
Yeah. The rural people compared to urban people tend to be much more I guess referral basis, much more people oriented in the country rather than numbers oriented in the city.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's it. So the next chapter is in insurance.
Yes.
What has all changed, even in 7 years?
Yeah, I've just been working around Ontario since then, but the one thing I don't think hasn't changed is it's maybe got worse here in Ontario. At least there are less trucking companies or insurance companies, I'm sorry, that even want to talk to you if you have a trucking company. And then you can narrow that list down pretty quick if you haul something dangerous or high value, and being as you only have 1 to 5, 6 trucks on the road, you have no negotiation skills with them whatsoever. You pay what they tell you, take it or leave it. That's it. And they do have a lot more control over who you hire than what I'd like to see. They have a little checklist on paper. This is what the guy has to fit. This is who you can and can't hire. I had guys come here looking for work that had maybe a couple of speeding tickets 2 years ago, or really good driver for 15 years, then quit driving for 2 or 3. Now he wants to come back. No, we can't take those guys. Why? I road tested them. You didn't. You're not even here. I a truck to me was more than just a number on the spreadsheet. It was, I needed that thing to stay upright. I needed it to be operated in a profitable manner. I'm not going to put somebody in it unless I think they can pull that off. The insurance company doesn't know that. I think they have far too much power that way. And the one thing we did learn very quickly is stick with a broker that services strictly the trucking industry. You try hooking up with an insurance broker that does everything, insures your house, insures your car. They may have a lower rate. You don't have the coverage you should have because they don't know the ins and outs.
I know.
And with the world getting so addicted to lawsuits, you want to make sure you get the right coverage that you need. It gets very expensive very quickly if you don't.
At what point do you know, if you do know, does it start paying for a carrier to start self-insuring some?
I was told that the way that works, it just wasn't even an option. Like I say, we got up to about 9 trucks at one point, and I asked about, how does this work? He said, "Oh, that's nothing you need to deal with or think about for quite a while." I don't know what quite a while is, but like he said, self-insured is kind of a contradictory term. You still have an insurance policy, but he said your deductibles are very high. Mm-hmm. Well, so's the cost of an accident nowadays. I'd rather pay a fair bit more and have a $5,000 deductible than to save $200 a month per truck and have a $100,000 deductible.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to do much anymore to rack up $100,000 settlement.
Yeah, for sure.
And the one thing I did try once, thinking I could get away with it, you hear U.S. guys talking about how little they pay in insurance. I thought, well, since I operate in the U.S., why not? Let's try this. So I called up a U.S. trucking broker, and as soon as we got to the part of address, they said, "Well, we can't insure you." "Why not? I operate in the States. Doesn't matter. We go by home base. We can't touch you."
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so if I had a post office box in Cleveland, Ohio, I could have half price insurance. That's the only technicality of it. But they wouldn't do it.
Oh, wow. So are you saying United States insurance is much more competitive? Or
at one time it was, yeah. Like people doing, just small operators doing the same work that I was. When I was paying $750, $800 a month, they were paying $5. Same coverage, same commodities, same areas of travel, just they were based in the States, whole different insurance company.
Yeah.
And again, that's
competition. The difficulty with Canada on many regards is we don't have as many choices.
Yeah.
Not just insurance, but many other factors. There's just so little competition. And I understand for the simple reason that, like, we only have 35 million people is in a humongous country,
Yeah.
It's just massive, and the economies of scale is just not there for a lot of businesses. That's for sure. But
and the insurance companies treat it kind of like the big carriers treat their freight rates. Well, we insure 5 times as many trucks as the guy in Canada does, so we can offer them a better price because on volume we still have a higher profit.
Yeah, for sure. Has much changed in 7 years?
Oh, with me, no, not really.
No, not really. Well, you you got your insurance rating, you got your insurance package, you got your history, so it's much easier for you to keep insurance than it is for people to get insurance, eh?
Yeah. And I have heard that people trying to start up a trucking company from scratch, and again, this is just Ontario, I got no knowledge elsewhere, but it's really tough because they don't care what you have as the principal driver. They don't care what you have as a history. They want a carrier history. Well, I don't have one because I'm just starting off. Well, in my case, that didn't matter. They treated it as one person for now, and then we'll take it from there. Now they want a full carrier CVOR history. Well, you haven't got one because you haven't gone anywhere yet as the carrier, just yourself. But yeah, in my case, after being around for this many years, you just send in a new abstract every year and give them a list of your equipment again, which they already have anyway. You just got to verify it, and it just, the payments keep rolling on. It's there's no hassle. Your broker, if they're any good, they tend to do your negotiating for you, see if they can trim anything anywhere. But
sure, I think there is different experience in different provinces. Because Alberta, for instance, has a lot of private insurance corporations. The Saskatchewan, it's just one insurance broker. Manitoba is just one insurance. Like we got these little fiefdoms happening all across our country, and nobody abides by. We shouldn't say nobody abides by the same rules, but there's just in different environments. So it's probably different in different provinces. It's easier to do things than in others.
And the less choices you have, the less business friendly that is. You need some competition in everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like I do know just some friends who insure vehicles in Alberta, for instance. It's way more expensive in Alberta, even though they have private insurance there, than it is, say, in Manitoba or Saskatchewan. And we have, one insurance provider in Manitoba and one in Saskatchewan. Just because the government does it, it may be cheaper, but you don't have any choice. I mean, they give you a number and that's it. There's no haggling or anything like this. But in Alberta, yeah, you have competition, but man, it can be much more expensive.
The one nuisance I found being a small operator, as far as insurance goes, we never hauled hazmat. I inquired about it a couple of times, and they said, well, give us the classification and the quantity of what you're going to haul. I said, I don't know yet. I'm just talking general hazardous freight, nothing, radioactive or anything like that, but chemicals, paint thinners, whatever. What are we looking at? And they said, no, we can't do it that way. We have to do this on a load by load basis. We'll tell you the increase for that load. Well, if somebody wants me to haul a load today, they're not interested in waiting till Friday afternoon for me to tell them if I can even do it or not.
Yeah.
So it just, where the big fleets, they just have a general blanket policy that covers, anything short of radioactive, and that's fine. It's all part of their policy. Whereas with us, it's either painfully expensive or you just don't do it.
Yeah.
I chose just not to do it.
Yeah. Or you're on the phone all the time, contacting this and contact. There's a lot of legwork and a lot of phone work to cross all the T's and dot all the I's.
For one load here, one load there. Just when you're small, it's not worth it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, the next chapter has to do on equipment. There's a lot of changes that have happened in equipment in even the last 5 years, for sure.
Yeah.
What's your philosophy on building equity? What's the best route to take?
Well, a lot of guys get caught up in buying what they would really like. They have the attitude, well, I've been at this so many years, I should have this truck. Yeah, maybe you should, but can you afford it? Don't buy what you want, buy what you need. And don't buy a massive horsepower engine if, for instance, you're pulling a dry van across the prairies. You don't need it. All that is fuel consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Just stick with the basics. Stick with the truck that's going to run up and down the road the cheapest. again, another unfair advantage. Before I started driving, I was in the mechanical repair business.
Mm.
I do most of my own maintenance and some of the lighter repairs. I've always had older equipment. I think the newest truck we ever owned was 6 years old, maybe. That was the newest. Right now, I'm driving an '06.
Mm.
I find the older stuff I can still work on. The new stuff, that, I mean, it's shutting off on the side of the highway every other day, and I can't touch it.
Yeah.
And I really, if you have that option, you're better to spend
Very
a little
expensive.
more money than you really want to on an older truck and run the older truck to start,
Yeah.
because at least it's going to give you some reliability, so you can build up,
Yeah.
a bit of equity rather than spending it all on service calls.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's I mean, what year did you start again? Oh, 1999?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a 1980. Started off with a 1980 International cab over that I painted in the backyard myself, and a rented trailer.
With a roller or a paintbrush?
No, actually with an actual gun, but
Oh,
I did it.
yeah, yeah. That's the big leap of technology was, I think it was 95 or 96. Keep forgetting what date where it went from mechanical to electrical.
Yeah.
And basically those were the sweet years until 1999, maybe 2000 at the latest. And then when they started coming in with the pollution control devices, that's a minefield and so customized. You can have two trucks coming off of the assembly line. One is a unbelievable lemon and the other is survivable. And it's a crapshoot, just rolling. That's why when it comes to independent operators, there's so many of them are just going to used equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to lean towards buying from somebody that they know, and they know the history of the truck, because that's the lowest risk factor. Because okay, well, 3 years ago the guy did an engine rebuild, and then he did this, and then they know how it's been driven. But a lot of the larger fleets are just, they'll buy 20, 30, 50 trucks and run them for 2-3 years, however many years that they run them, and then they just get rid of them. And I think smaller carriers, guys going into that, I don't know of very many who go that route of just new equipment. I know one very successful carrier who deals with nothing newer than 15 years.
Yeah.
They only buy older equipment. They have huge service bay, and they just, they'll buy an old, what looks like a junkyard or whatever, and they'll just bring it through the service bays and rebuild the whole sucker, bumper to bumper, and then out on the road, and they have their how do I say, their predictability and their is much better than sometimes the newer stuff. Like I've always been amazed, even like for the last 20 years, that you buy a brand new truck and it's expected that you get the bugs out in the first 6 to 9 months. And how in the world would an automobile industry that, like, only the trucking industry can have those kind of acceptable standards? Like, oh yeah, you're at the side of the road at 30 below, but that's kind of standard. It's only a 1-month-old truck, like, hello, it's a $200,000 truck and I'm at the side of the road, Oh yeah, these sensors go all the time. Click, 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 and you're off and rolling again. And I know I talked to somebody with this, and this was a good 10-15 years ago, where I said, you know what, if you're going to buy a new truck, buy it 6 months old where somebody else is taking the bugs out of it. If you can. It's very difficult to do it because that's when the real value comes after about 6 months, because who knows what you can experience in the first 6 to 9 months. But I think it's engineering that is subpar
We've got a few guys in my area here that have taken older trucks, like early 2000s, and put upwards of $100,000 into them.
Sure.
Rebuild the engine, transmission, rear ends, paint it, new wiring harnesses, do whatever plumbing it needs, just everything almost like new, only without 27 sensors that are going to give you problems. And in the long run, they find that's actually a cheaper way to go.
Yeah. All of those sensors, in my opinion, we get a swing of 40 above Celsius in the summer and 40 below in the winter.
Yeah,
that's hard on any kind of electrical and steel and any kind of connectivity. It is just brutal. There's hardly any other country other than maybe Russia that has the same experience as Siberia or something, and it's we should have every kind of exception for all of those things. Just take all of the sensors off, but it's hard to buy a truck that's made for this country.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I know guys, it's maybe not so much of a problem now anymore. They've in the last 5 or 8 years, but even 10, 12 years ago, trying to buy a new truck that is insulated enough to keep warm when it's 25, 30 below.
Yeah.
Like I remember driving and having blankets over my legs and trying to keep my feet from freezing kind of stuff. And that was just par for the course, back then anyway. It's a little bit better for sure now. Like a little bit more comfortable now. They thought it through, but it took so long,
When I was still with the doing the construction thing, I would work through the driver agency in the wintertime, just a little job here, a little job there. They sent me from Toronto to Indianapolis in a brand new 1995 truck. I'm not going to say the brand because you don't want to get sued, neither do I. And it was like a minus 15, minus 20 all the way from Toronto to Indy and all the way back. Brand new truck. I've never been so cold in my life in a cab as I was in that thing, because it was just your basic piece of scrap fleet truck, no extra frills, nothing, just as plain and cheap as we can build it. And
yeah,
that's one of the few times you spend a little more money than the next guy. Just
yeah,
that kind of fits in. Same with drivetrains. You got to think long term when you're speccing your equipment. A lot of guys, I really want that big horsepower. Well, why do you? Well, it's just nicer to drive. Yeah, but you don't need it, and it's going to cost you a mile of the gallon.
And not just that. Sometimes, well, it's on the yard and it's already there. I'll just take it. They don't know that it makes a half a mile to the gallon difference because of what it's actually done. And it's the urgency of the moment seizes them and say, I got to get going. I got to go. And I said, man, just drive for someone else for a month and wait, or 2 or 3, something like that.
Yeah.
It's a huge, like you can buy a house almost for what you're buying, a highly depreciating piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Man, it's scary. Let's talk a little bit about reefer, van, deck, and what kind of equipment do you look at and focus on?
Well, again, to the thinking long term, a lot of guys with flatbeds, for instance, they'll make the mistake of there'll be 2 trailers sitting side by side, identical, other than the fact one's aluminum, one's all steel with a wood floor. Well, that trailer's $1,500 cheaper. I better have that one. No, leave it there. It's heavier, and that eventually will jump up and bite you. And the fact that it's all steel, it's going to need painted eventually. The aluminum trailer won't. The wood floor, especially in our climate, It gets wet in the fall, freezes in the winter. It's impossible to get snow and ice off the deck to keep it perfectly scraped down. The aluminum trailer, you give it a smack with the end of the hammer and it cleans off. It just, you can't nickel and dime on this stuff. Yeah, aluminum wheels over steel wheels, whatever. If you can save a few bucks and you're content with repainting your wheels every couple of years, well, that's no big deal. But you got to buy something thinking that it's going to last you at least a few years past when it's paid for. And it's got to be what you want, not what was handy today, which is kind of why I started, well, financially too, but it's why I started off with a rented trailer. I could afford older, tough trailers. I couldn't afford what was good, what was going to do the job well. So I rented one for the first 9 months, I guess, and then bought the first trailer. I'm not a fan of renting equipment, but if you can't buy exactly what you want, don't settle for what you don't want. Yeah. Just rent something until you find what you do want.
Yeah.
Because again, in the long term.
I got a few clients who have 2 or 3 trailers, you know, and they just go in a rotation and that's a lot of money to just sit there. And because freight does change, sometimes you need this and sometimes you need that and all different, but to have that volume of investment just sitting there, you have to either change the type of freight that you're hauling, customer base that you're hauling, or you have to somehow or other increase the return on your investment. How much longer does on average does a good trailer last than a truck?
That depends. I get a long life out of a truck because I'm beyond diligent with maintenance. But
sure.
I've bought trailers before that were already 10, 12 years old, depending what they've done, and get another 5 or 6 out of them, no problem. The flatbeds anyway. Just if they've been kept up, cleaned, painted, touched up, painted when they need it, the deck's not all beat up, they haven't been overloaded, and you can tell that pretty quick on a flatbed. Just get up on top of the deck, walk from one end to the other. Do you hear the floorboards moving around underneath your feet? Well, then it's flexing too much, it's popping bolts, leave it where it is. But if it seems solid, you know, I think the newest trailer I ever bought was 6 months old. The rest of them were all several years. I just bought a set of B trains here in the fall. They're 2011s, so they're 12, 13 years old already.
Yeah.
But you can't go with the big fleets. They always go by what the spreadsheet shows. How old is this equipment? Well, then it has to leave. Well, no, crawl underneath it, see what shape it's in. Maybe it's in its prime. Maybe it's better than the 5-year-old piece of equipment parked next to it.
Yeah.
I never had any hard and fast rule for age.
Sure.
Well, I've leaned more towards condition.
Generally, larger firms, I guess, would just say, well, you have to keep your equipment up to date. And new equipment. And that's more of a balance sheet answer to equipment than it is actually what it should be is a maintenance issue.
Yeah.
Maintenance and reliability issue. That's really what it should be. But it's almost impossible for large fleets to meticulously manage maintenance the way a small carrier can meticulously manage maintenance, because large some guys do pretty good on it, but realistically they all have this okay, it's 15 years old, get rid of it, you know, and or it's 10 years and get rid of it, whatever their line in the sand is, and it's too general. It's not specific. I always use the big feature that when a carrier says we won't take any operator on that has a truck older than 4 or 5 years. Well, that significantly changes the driver pool of operators, because some of the best operators have really well maintained old stuff.
Yeah.
And they are way more reliable, predictable, and safe, everything than the guys with the new stuff and continuously turning over equipment and stuff like that.
I stuck my foot in my mouth about that with a manager at a big carrier once. I asked him what his policy was, and he said 5 year old or newer. I said, why? Well, we want reliability. I said, then you should let well-maintained older trucks work here, because the new stuff, we've seen how reliable that is.
Yeah, I got
And
this.
he kind of gave me a funny look. I said, so what you're saying is you want your independent operators to be in debt.
Yeah.
Rather, you don't really care about the reliability factor. You want them to be in debt. And he didn't really have an answer for me.
Yeah, it's a valid assumption because who can own who can own a 4-year-old truck and debt free, especially nowadays, the way the prices are. That's
I wanted everybody to have either the smallest payments possible or no payments possible, because we wanted to shut down for a couple of weeks at Christmas, and with the type of material we hauled, July was sometimes a little slower.
Mhm.
I don't want some guy hitting the panic button because he has to have a load today or he goes broke. No, keep your payments down. If we get a slow week, take it easy. You worked hard.
Yeah.
Just these guys that get trapped into having to work 52 weeks of the year, 3,000 miles a week without, nonstop,
Yeah.
they're beat before they start.
Yeah, I worry for some of the guys who get into these, $4,000 or $5,000 truck payments for 7 years,
Yeah.
and I'm going, look, I can't project that out into the future, and I give them, like a 10% shot getting to 7 years, a 10% chance, and I'd love for everybody to make it, but those numbers are just too harsh. And there's too many things that can go wrong, too many variables that one injector goes and you suddenly go from 9 miles to the gallon down to, 6, and you don't catch it for 2 weeks or something. I just throw money out the window, and there's just way too many things that can go wrong. And
and too many people think of it as, okay, right now with a truck that's warranted, I can do those payments. Yeah, but the warranty doesn't go to the end of your payment term.
no,
And I haven't heard of too many trucks newer than 2012 that even will make the 1 million kilometer mark before they need rebuilt.
Yeah.
We've got a construction company in the area that had to rebuild 3 of them just last year. The highest mileage of all of them had 620,000 on it. And he's a pretty good driver. I know he wasn't abusing it. So if you have to stretch those payments out over 7 years, and at the 4-year mark, all of a sudden you got a $50,000 overhaul to do. Well, now what?
Yeah.
You can't walk away from it. You still owe more on it than it's worth.
You got to roll negative equity into another truck, and I agree with you when your original statement where manufacturers should not have their own financing companies, because that's a pretty serious conflict of interest, because you're just rolling it over, and it's in a never plan, and with a really bad kick in the pants when you get out of the industry if you don't watch it. That's for sure. So,
well, we had one owner operator. His truck was beat. He was one of these guys that couldn't even so much as change a headlight bulb on his own. So his maintenance costs were high, and his truck was tough. So we tried to convince him to buy a late model used one, but no, he had to have brand new. This was in just as the 09s were coming out, just when we got into DEF fluid and particulate filters. And anyway, on his way, what was supposed to be his final trip with that truck, he was going to deal it when he got back. On his way out from home, he got 60 miles from home and blew the rear end out of it.
mm.
That truck got towed into the dealer, just in the condition it was. And they hooked him up with his new one, and away he went, a trip early. And they didn't change his trade-in value on the paper, but they bumped up his monthly payments. They said, so that rear end, if you take this over 5 years, I think he bought his truck over. I said, that rear end is now going to cost you about $7,000 instead of the $3,500 that it would have, because it's rolled into your financing. They just, It'd have been better to just sell the truck to the scrapyard, take that for a cash down payment on his new one. But
My goodness. Yeah. Yeah, it's the urgency of the moment sometimes just you pay for it for years afterwards. That's for sure. So anything else about equipment come to mind?
just to contradict myself, when it comes to reefers and vans, the older stuff isn't always better. Reefer unit gets tired, the insulation settles, it's harder to keep things to temperature because of the structure of a van or a reefer. I call it the pop can theory. You can put a cement block on top of a pop can, it'll support itself. You crack that tab just a little bit and you can put another can of pop on it and it'll flatten it.
Yeah.
You get one component that gets weak and everything around it gets weak. And that's why guys find they'll have an older dry van and they can't slide the bogies. They can't get the doors shut. They've got to move the trailer to just close the doors. Maybe the automotive manufacturers don't have such a bad idea when they say, if your van trailer is more than 10 years old, you don't load our freight. It's not such a bad plan. It should actually. That's the one. Vans and reefers are the only exception to the rule for me of, if you're going to have one, it's got to be, 7 or 8 years old or newer.
Oh, yeah.
It's just not worth the so-called savings to have an older one in the long run.
Yeah. Weight can sometimes be an issue then too, is like,
yeah. Because
I heard one time, I don't know, maybe you can correct me on this. Older ones somehow or other gain weight. How does that work?
Wood floor
just accumulating of moisture and just keeps
all the spray from the tractor and the trailer throwing moisture off the ground up to the floor, and then it absorbs it, and they get heavier.
Oh yeah.
Or in the case of the reefer, they're constantly warm cool, a lot of condensation, and that adds to the weight. It sounds like it should be minimal, but it's quite often not.
Yeah.
And the back doors on a van trailer, for instance, you get a few pinholes in the aluminum covering. Doesn't look like a big deal. The door still closes, but it's still soaking in water. All of a sudden, your door that used to weigh 120 pounds, now it weighs 170.
Sure. Yeah. Well, knowing equipment, that's a big factor for sure. Yeah.
Well, and some guys, like I say, some guys get all caught up in, here's what I want. It's not what I need. And then they can't fill it with fuel. They can't, half the stuff you go to load, they can't load it. We used to haul a few commodities that we were paid by weight. Lighter the better, fill her up. Yeah. Those guys can't do that. We'd load the same commodity, go on the same destination, make $250 more on that load than they did because we were lighter.
Yeah.
We didn't spend more money to be lighter. Just that's the way it was. Just we were careful what we bought.
Yeah, for sure. Those pennies add up. Dollars add up, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think there is such a thing, but I've been accused of thinking too long term when it comes to money. I don't believe that's possible. You can't think too long term.
Well, I agree on there. Okay, so the next chapter is rates and service. That has know your costs and margins, present yourself as competent and professional, and that's really presenting yourself to the customer. And what were the main features in that chapter?
Charge what you're worth. Don't be pressured into a lower rate because the competition works for that. If the competition was reliable, you wouldn't be talking to me at all. So I'll be there. And then once you make that arrangement, you make bloody well sure you do what you said you were going to do. Service was always a pretty big thing for us. I have no interest in trying to be competitive for price, but we hauled a lot of building materials directly to the job site. They've got men waiting to use this stuff. They've got machinery maybe being brought in special to unload it. If you say you're going to be there at 7 a.m., you're there at 7 a.m. If something goes wrong, which it always does, at least pick up the phone. But a lot of guys would just show up, tell you what you want to hear to get the freight, and then show up when they feel like it. and they never worked for that customer again, because now the accessory charges from the customer was $2,000 because the load was late. Well, they can't afford to use you anymore.
I think it helps to a certain extent to have in a person's mind what their floor is on the rate. You won't haul anything less than a certain amount. And if you're a small carrier, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, maybe even 15 trucks, do you have to be in the industry for a long time to know what that floor is for you? Or do you arbitrarily do it? Or do you have to know from your customer's perspective as opposed to what you do? You need
to give me a guideline. There was one larger trucking company that used to feed us a bit of freight off the start, and I got to know the dispatchers pretty well, and they maybe weren't supposed to tell me, but they told me kind of roughly the percentage of the freight bill they were keeping and the rest I was getting. That tells you what the gross freight is that they're charging. That'll give you an idea. There's some customers that they establish the freight rates. Here's what we pay, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
You can probably negotiate a little higher on your own elsewhere, but for that customer, that tells you right off the start, here's what I'm going to make. To really fine tune it, it takes a while. There's certain areas, especially with us here in Ontario, going where we went, you learn the hard way pretty fast that there's some places there just is no freight, period. There's freight going there. There's plenty of freight going there. There's nothing coming home. So you got to charge through the roof to go there. In our case, that was, Boston, Philadelphia, for instance, all kinds of population. They need stuff, but there's no industry. So there's nothing coming back. You're either into a lot of empty miles, maybe coming halfway home before you load something, or you're going to come home really cheap. Your call, whichever you'd rather do. Yeah. But you got to know that up front and structure your freight rate to get there accordingly. Build 250 empty miles into that, and then you're prepared. The other thing some guys make the mistake of, they'll go to quote freight, say from Ontario to the US. They'll go on one of the online load boards and they'll look to see what's there coming home, and then they'll see what it pays, and they base their outbound freight on that. No, don't do that, because that freight that you just scouted out that's coming home today, none of it may be there tomorrow, or it may pay half what it does. You've always got to have it etched in your mind. This is your minimum, and if you can get a round trip rate to go one way from anybody, wonderful. Doesn't happen very often, but don't lowball it just because you think you can get a good paying load coming home. Yeah, like I said, maybe today you will get a good paying load coming home. Tomorrow you may have nothing coming home. Our freight coming home, the amount of it always changed. It was constantly changing. When we first started off, it was, Central Ohio, all the loads you want coming back to Ontario. And over time that changed. It was Eastern Ohio and Indiana. Couldn't buy a load home out of Indiana. And the last few years we ran the US, how many would you like? It moved around and I don't know why. Industry they'll shift production from one plant to another, and all of a sudden the freight that used to be made elsewhere, now it's not. Now it's made 200 miles away.
So it's very feast and famine.
Oh yeah,
random.
And don't get used to anything. Nothing is going to ever stay the same. The one big thing that gets a lot of people is the currency exchange. If you're doing cross-border work, a lot of U.S. companies will not pay you in Canadian money. They want to pay you in their currency. Well, that works well as long as the exchange rate stays the same. And the time we crossed the border, there was twice that it changed dramatically. We went from our dollar being 74 cents American to our dollar being $1.02 American.
Oh, yeah.
So if you've got a customer you're hauling to for $1,500 American today, that's fine. That's almost $2,000 Canadian when you convert it. But when the exchange rate gets to be equal, oops, it's not worth going anymore. Yeah. So you've either got to build in a currency factor, or some guys get away with pricing it at par. you can do that, that's all the better.
Sure.
But
Now, how far ahead do you budget freight? If it changes so often, it's all over. Do you go on a week by week basis?
we used to, for the regular customers, we used to give them a freight rate at the first of the year. We were relatively confident that it was not going to change dramatically that quickly.
Did you have a formula for fuel surcharge and stuff like that? Yeah.
Which has changed a lot in the last few years. I don't go any distance but burn more fuel because the heavy. Yeah, it used to be back in the day, fuel price was 75, 80 cents a liter here.
Yeah.
And what we did was every 2%, 2 cent per liter increase meant a 1% fuel surcharge.
Mm.
And if you do the math on that right, it factors out that you're not overcharging anybody. If you take what the trip paid in the first place, you add that percentage, all it covers is your increase in fuel cost. So if they are looking over your shoulder, it's a feather in your cap that you're being honest about it. A lot of guys would just throw a number out there, and because they heard somebody else was charging that. Yeah. Well, maybe your freight rate was $2,000 and theirs was $1,400. Yeah, their fuel surcharge is going to be a higher percentage. Percentages are really deceiving sometimes.
Yeah, I remember reading an article a number of years ago, and I made a comment that not all freight rates have fuel surcharge assigned to it. Sometimes they said, forget that, just give me one number this week and that's it.
Yeah.
And then I had a guy, I guess, complain or argue with me. So, no, though the industry is moving that and everybody's going to have freight rates. And it's not. And the difficulty is that even if it's 98 or 99% that there is a fuel surcharge on it, it's the 1% that throws all the numbers off. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so you have to know what the combination or what the net is anyway. So it's a part of life that realistically the industry itself will never be 100%. You break it out with fuel surcharge, and there's some load brokers. I think in the States it's illegal for a fuel surcharge to be taken off from either a load broker or something. It has to go to the end user.
Right.
Yeah, those are the laws. In Canada, those laws are not there. No. They've always asked for it, but they don't do it. And so the load brokers here in Canada, or even in this, like the load brokers in the States, will say, well, it's all included. And when it's all included, then they don't have to section off their, and it just allows the load brokers just to get a little bit more on there. So it's a little shifty kind of a setup for the industry, but I mean, you got to live with it. You got to know what your costs are, and you got to be happy with. Well, shouldn't say happy with what you get, but it's a feast and famine industry, and you have to live through whatever it is. Of course, you're living.
Well, and I always specified whenever we gave anybody freight rates at the first of the year, it always specified all the conditions were at the top of the page first before we even got to numbers. Yeah. And I specified that this price list is based on this price per liter local price. After that, fuel surcharges will apply. And then it was all spelled out. There's no surprise in the middle of the season that, price of fuel takes a spike and you start charging them more, or phone them up first, tell them you're going to charge them more. It's no surprise. They had plenty of warning this was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it seems you have to write everything down nowadays. You can't assume anybody's going to remember anything that you had just in a conversation. It's all got to be on paper.
Yeah.
Or email, whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anything other in rates and service?
Not really. Just like I say, my basic guideline was always, if you want a cheap truck, call somebody else. I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
But if you want the truck that's going to give you good service, give us a call. And
Sure.
that's a guideline I think everybody should go by. There seems to be too many customers nowadays than there used to be that, well, they don't really care so much about service, just can you save us a bit of money? And you can't change that. They're just a good customer to avoid.
For sure. Well, the next chapter is other carriers. That ought to be interesting. You keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah.
What's working with other carriers? I know it's done quite a bit. I mean, you get one large carrier hauling other large carriers' trailers, and they're going back and forth all over the place. In a smaller carrier setting, how much do you work with others?
At one time, a lot, when the economy was really booming back, what that'd have been about 04, maybe 03, 04, 05. We actually had a friend of ours, we're, like I say, just north of Toronto. A friend of ours had a yard in Windsor, had some trucks running out of there. For a couple of years, we were just really lucky that when we were busy, they weren't, and vice versa. So I had one customer near Chicago that would call up on Tuesday mid-morning. I have 7 loads. Okay, when do you need them? Oh, this week.
Oh,
Great. So I would make 2 rounds. Some of them we'd put on our own trucks, but I would make 2 rounds with the B trains. I'd put 2 loads on the B trains, go to their yard, swap it from the B train onto 2 of their tandems. And for them, Chicago was basically a day trip, and clean up a lot of freight pretty quick. And by the same token, they had areas their guys would not go east of I-81 in the US. Didn't care what it paid, not doing it. We didn't care. So we'd do their freight that went that direction. But it's tough, and I'm willing to bet it's getting a lot tougher to find people nowadays that you can trust, that's going to take good care of your customer and not try to just take your customer. They're out there. We had a few guys that fit the bill, but nowadays I don't know how easy that would be.
yeah. It's I get a little bit of the how do I say, the backwater, the rumors in the back, and there are some larger carriers that are much less respected by other carriers than others. Some have a great reputation, some not so good. Some everybody sort of shuns, and nobody hauls, for them or otherwise.
Yeah.
It's so much of the industry is reputation, and being a person of integrity is absolutely essential for long-term survival. I've talked to some owners of medium-sized carriers, and they said, this one carrier has been really good. All of a sudden, he fell on hard times, and trying to get a phone back from this guy who has your trailer for 3 weeks, and trying to it's tough. And the vast majority of carriers are trying to take freight from other carriers. Yeah. It's not like there's new freight coming out of the woodwork and everybody has some leftovers. No, it's a stealing industry. You're just stealing somebody else's freight. That's the vast majority of changeover in there. And it's, who are you friends with and who are you not? That's a huge that can take decades to be able to trust people.
And your competition it would vary with the economy. Like living where we do, that far from any major center, the big fleets didn't want any part of anything up here until the economy hit the toilet. Then all of a sudden they're really interested in the freight we have up here, and they'll do it really cheap. And until the economy starts to pick up, and then they drop that customer like a hot rock. some of the customers are smart enough to know that's what's going to happen and just don't get roped into that situation in the first place. And some of them do. And then somehow that's supposed to become your problem. Well, you should work that cheap now because he's gone.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, that's for sure. Yeah, that's how cutthroat is it?
In a
How
lot of
bad
cases,
is
pretty
it?
bad.
What's that?
In a lot of cases, pretty bad.
Pretty bad.
Yeah.
Uh,
They
I know a few stories. I know one story where a carrier, how do I gotta really watch how I say this. I don't think anybody can figure this one out. But a carrier would get this other smaller carrier to do loads for them. And they would find areas where they can penalize them. Oh no, that's a $500 fine because of XYZ. And they did that. Well, and then they kept using them, and run up these things and never really was, well, we'll just put this on our tab, so to speak.
yeah.
And we'll give you the full amount, but you still owe us for this. And it slowly starts building. And they get higher and higher and higher. And then all in 1 month, they get them to haul a whole bunch of freight, and they say, oh, okay, by the way, this whole month's worth of work that you've done for us now is cross-membered or is written off by these prior bills, and wham, it would hit it, and the company went bankrupt.
Yeah.
Just because they had hundreds of thousands of dollars that was accumulated over about 3 years, and it just wiped them right out. I'm not sure how ethical that was. I don't know whether they were really bad at and deserved all of those penalties, or whether it was just like, okay, this guy, we're just taking him out, and we got a long approach on it, and that's scary, Truly,
well, we always had a pretty detailed agreement anytime you did broker freight out to anybody else. Our carrier agreement was pretty detailed of here's when you pick up, here's what you deliver, here's what it's going to weigh, here's what you're getting paid, no extras unless we discuss them midstream if something changes. And if you try to backdoor the customer on me, you get nothing. Then it's all spelled out. And then it's, if they do try to backdoor you, and a lot of them will, you can refuse to pay them. There's not a darn thing they can do about it legally because they signed for that.
Yeah.
As long as you have a good relationship with your customer and they'll say, yeah, he approached me the day after they hauled the load.
Yeah.
You're covered.
Yeah. You got to have thick skin, and you have to discern a crook, and you have to know when you're being played and not. And nobody's perfect at it, but you have to know people's reputation, and you have to somehow or other live with that, and live in it. There's a great book by Harvey out of Minneapolis. I can't remember his last name. Who says "Swim with the sharks without getting eaten alive" is the book title. It's a great book title. And he has another great book title. Beware of the naked man who offers you his shirt. It's a lot of reputation. I love his book titles in there. Harvey McKay, that's the guy. And but that is the trucking industry. It is like you better know who you are sitting side by side with, And there are some really top-notch people in the industry, some with great reputations and honorable from every, but there's turnover in trucking industry, and guys coming in and guys going out, and it's
the bottom feeders, they really don't realize, I don't think, just how, for such a big country, how well acquainted so many people in this industry are. You can screw somebody over in Winnipeg, and the guy in Montreal probably knows about it a week later, if not sooner. Yeah,
Absolutely.
you really got to want that freight pretty bad to try and take it from somebody else, because your name is going to be mud from that point on.
Yeah, exactly. There's a sort of a movement in academia, that capitalism is all about greed and stuff like this. No way. Capitalism, the way it really works is capitalism is all about integrity.
Mhm.
You cannot operate a business long term when you are a crook.
No.
You can hide yourself to some degree sometimes, but eventually it all comes back and to haunt people. So it is that's one thing about the trucking industry, that the deregulation has made it basically it's a free market system. It's a straight supply and demand. And is it tough to live in? Yes, but you've got to learn how to be a person of integrity in order to work in the industry long term. That's
Yeah.
I like what you said in there. You keep your friends close and your enemies closer, because sometimes you can be exposed and you got to watch out. That's especially during tough times, like right now when the rates have been low, and I can't see the rates going anywhere for the entire 2024 year. It's probably going to be very stagnant. In an election year, nobody's going to make any major breakouts this way or that. Everything's just everything. Nobody's going to do much venturing of anything. It's going to be the same old, and it's tough. And
And
yeah,
this year, I think, is going to be probably worse than normal, because the economy's been riding higher than it deserved to for the last 2 or 3 years. It's got to come down. It's probably not going to do it gently, I don't think.
well, I think the construction industry is going to get hit in 2024 in Canada quite a bit.
Yeah.
CMHC a few weeks back said that there was a 73% drop in permitting, compared to the previous year in large construction projects.
Right.
The increase in interest rates, it takes sometimes a couple of years before all of those projects get worked through. Once they're worked through, nothing new starts, and it's gonna just die. Well, that's my theory, just from what CMHC said. So construction, who knows what's going to happen, but Canada, I think, is going to get hit pretty hard.
Yeah, it's always on a time delay, because whatever
Yeah.
is getting done this year was on the books in 2022.
Yeah, for
Just
sure.
waiting to get to its place in the lineup to happen.
Yeah. The small construction, like the housing, like the personal dwellings or whatever, that stopped, a year ago, or very much slowed down a year ago. But the large stuff, there was always some movement or whatever. And yeah, I don't know. I'm a little concerned about that industry, even though I'm not at all related to it in there. So, but anyway, anything else about other carriers?
Not really, just some you should deal with, can deal with. And it, like you say, it takes a long time to determine who you should avoid, who you can work with. Stay in regular contact with your customers to make sure whoever you gave some freight to, that they did the job properly, that they didn't, immediately offer that customer a lower price. um,
Yeah, for sure.
Trusting anybody is pretty hard. I've like I say, I could count how many other smaller operators that I trust on one hand and not have to take the other hand out of my pocket. And
Yeah.
after 25 years almost in the business, that's a pretty depressing number.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, the next chapter called Attracting Customers,
Yes.
attracting, keeping, and dealing with customers. Again, that's a little bit, I guess, geographical sometimes too, where you have, you don't have new customers all the time. You're trying to keep your core customers, right?
Yeah. If
Yeah.
you can, the more more time goes by, you can stay dealing with the same people, the better. You both know what to expect from each other. Sometimes you got to watch, even living in a small area that we do here, the little bit of industry that's here, you would think, well, they're going to want to deal with us because we're local. And not necessarily. Maybe the freight's all decided at head office in Quebec City or Vancouver, or,
Yeah.
maybe the people here have nothing to do with it. So you can't assume anything that you're instantly going to be busy. You see trucks from Manitoba coming into our little town to load freight. Well, they must need me. No, not necessarily. But the big thing, if you go talking to customers, make sure you spell it out for them, that you know what you're doing and that you're going to service levels are going to stay good all the time.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, make sure you mean it. And it never hurts to ask ahead of time if they show any inkling they're going to use you for trucks. Find out what their payment terms are. Last thing you want is to commit, 2 loads a week every week for eternity and find out later that they pay in 120 days.
Oh yeah.
That's, establish that off the start. Do they have any special little requirements they need of you that maybe nobody else ever has? Really, it's not something you can do in a 10-minute conversation.
Oh.
Yeah, and if they start waltzing out lower freight rates that somebody else gave them and say, well, you got to match these, can't do it. Sorry. It's easier to just not take on that new customer than it is to take on a customer you're going to not make money with.
Yeah.
I'm a little greedy that way. I don't have any moral obligation to make sure every piece of freight ever gets moved. I got to make a living here. That's my main goal, not the fact that they have nothing left behind that didn't get loaded. That's their problem, not mine. If they want it moved, pay enough, we'll move it.
You have any special abilities, talents, philosophy on attracting customers, other than
Not really?
Obviously, reputation is a big man. Do shippers talk to shippers?
Not a lot, and quite often, especially in a small town like this, you'll find that if you truck for one company, their competitor doesn't even want to go near you, just in case you start spilling the beans of where you're delivering to for them. And it's we didn't very often haul for a lot of people anywhere really that were in the same industry. We'd haul lumber for one customer, and the other hardwood mills wanted nothing to do with you, and brick for another company, and the guy around the corner that makes cut stone, no, he didn't want to deal with you. Just too much risk, I guess, probably from past experience, because a lot of truck drivers can't keep their mouths shut, and everywhere they go, they gotta, you do one load for customer B, well, they got to tell you all about where they went last week for customer A.
Yeah.
None of their business.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, we'll get to staffing issues in a little bit, but that is a big issue for sure. Yeah,
We had some drivers over the years that became very good liars just for that reason. Another driver would ask them, "Oh, you're hauling that stuff. What's that pay?" And this is back 20 years ago, and they'd say, "Oh, $4 a mile." Really? That's really good. Yeah, yeah. And we were getting like $2.90 maybe, or $3, but yeah, this guy thought he would then go into the customer and undercut us at $3.50 and get the work and never get the call.
Never get the call.
Yeah, a couple of our guys became good poker players, good liars, whatever you want to call it.
Poker, there's definitely a strong need for some poker knowledge sometimes, being able to read a room, read a face, read a customer. That is, it's not all just keeping a truck between the ditch. That's for sure. That's a completely different talent that a person has, and a lot of people think they have it, and not very many have it. I have a personal weakness that I tend to trust people really quickly and too much. And I mean, we have whatever 35 employees, and I do not have the final say in hiring people anymore because I keep making up these moves. And so I leave it about three people that do it, and I say, well, what do you think about this? Well, there's no way. Okay, all right. And my radar is geared a little bit differently. I mean, I could change and learn that, but um, I would rather delegate that and just say, you know what, somebody else deal with that because I can use my talents otherwise. With this hole in my character, not character, personality or whatever. But I like playing poker with my guys, like a bunch of guys that we get together regularly. But in real business, uh, that that takes a special kind of nerve that you have to be sensitive to what environment you're walking yourself into. And
I'm not sure in this day and age I would be very good at growing a company again because I'm not a good salesman. I'm the kind that'll come in and ask what they need and then tell them what we can do, what we can do it for. I'm not good at the, you know, spend 10 minutes telling them what a wonderful company they have and, just really play up the salesman nonsense. It's just, let's just stick with the facts and see if you want to deal with me, see if I want to deal with you, get this over with.
yeah,
I don't know if that works anymore.
uh, I suppose in some circles it really does. When you have a good solid reputation, it really it adds to the authenticity of a person if they're just straightforward. Um, um, but yeah, that's it. There's varying uh, types of talents that people need to build a trucking company, and you can be really gifted in 3 out of 4, but the one can take you down, like
Yeah.
just wipe you right out, and that's a risk, and overestimating your own capabilities is a real fault that can absolutely wipe you out. I know some guys who think they are way more valuable than what they really are, and and I slowly back away. Yeah, okay, all right, you can back away because you're gonna get hit by shrapnel from this guy as he blows up,
Yeah.
and it takes a sober judgment of people, that's for sure. And whether it's customers or employees, that's we'll get to the employees later, say a little bit. Let's go to the next one now. Keeping it legal.
Yeah.
Cutting corners don't make a long-term approach. That was my thing on it. Keeping it legal. How often do you get into a situation where you are overweight, are in a situation where you're not quite legal, or you're 30 minutes away and you're running out of hours? Where do you draw the line?
Overweight, I never really had any patience for that because a lot of the guys would say, "Oh well, I know my way around the scales."
Yeah.
So does the DOT guy. He knows where you're going. He might
Yeah.
be waiting for you. No, we learned pretty early on to get really handy with the air gauges on the tractor and the trailers, and you could pretty much scale it within a few 100 pounds right where you load. And
So you got to take care right at the beginning, right at the yard.
yeah, because you might drive.
Don't wait for a cat scale, 30 minutes down the road.
And then, at that point, are you going to keep going or are you going to turn around and go back 30 minutes, argue with them, take a little bit off? And no, it's easier just to deal with it right off the start. I was never a fan of running equipment that had something that you knew was wrong with it, or that there was anything wrong with the load. Had arguments with a few drivers about us doing flatbed work of how many straps should be used. They would argue, well, we really don't need that many. Okay. But I've never been yelled at by a DOT officer for having too many. I have heard guys getting yelled at for not having enough. So let's go overboard, make it look better than it is.
How much have you dealt with DOT that don't know what they're doing?
50% of the time, probably.
50%.
In the US, a lot of them are pretty, that I've run into, are pretty thorough with what they do. They know what they're up to. And in Canada, Ontario is the only one I know of. And honestly, I've had a couple of them. You have a little roadside chat and you're thinking to yourself, how did you earn a badge? You just asked me the stupidest question possible. And it really takes more willpower than I normally have to not tell them that. That wouldn't have a good end.
Target right on your forehead.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something about Canada and bureaucracies that we tend to hire people right out of got their bachelor's degree of something or other, and only and then you say, oh, here's the rule book, go out and inspect vehicles, or go inspect the plumbing on this house. He doesn't know one end of a pipe wrench from another,
No.
But I know, because my my cousin's husband used to be a building inspector, and he didn't know one end of a hammer from another.
No.
And it's like they hired him because, well, he was closest to the job and he was the first to apply, or whatever this, I don't know, but and that's really unfortunate, because Canada, I mean, I'm sure they're trying to get somewhat educated individuals, but it is sad sometimes where they just don't know what they're doing.
No.
And it ends up being dangerous that they don't know what they're doing.
Well, they'll look for the low-hanging fruit. Your lights all work, the tires look good, it's the load tied down, good enough, away you go. Did you bend down and look over and notice there's 2 wheel seals leaking, or something? Just they just look for the easy stuff and let you go. Or if they get a notion that for some reason they think your truck, there's something going on here, they will be at it for an hour and a half trying to find something, or it's not there. Just leave it alone. There's nothing wrong with this. There's I don't know.
And there's so much that can be corner cut. Like there's a lot of people, like, I mean, a good brake job is something, like a coat hanger and a pair of pliers, like that's what they think is okay. And it's dangerous, and oftentimes they get away with it for a while, but at some point in time they should have some sort of a reality check. And there's turnover. There like some industries are prone to more infractions than others. I don't know about like the dump truck industry, for instance, or shuttle trucks, or short, like city trucks, or whatever it is. There's some industries that people gravitate to as well. There's less conflict here, so we can cut the corners here, or something like that, because they all bid on the freight, and then they underbid, and they really don't know what they're doing, and their cash flow goes down. Well, this will do for now, very that's one thing I do know about a lot of truck drivers. They really don't know what their running costs actually are.
No.
And one of the first things to really suffer is maintenance. The good preventative stuff goes out the window, and they just or they try and get that extra 1 or 2 loads in a day, going too fast and just unsafe. They're just pushing it too much. And I don't know. Canada is not the place to cut corners, I don't think. No. It's there's too many variants, especially in the wintertime. If there's an extra 10 kilometers an hour, maybe you may get there half an hour sooner, but the probability of losing control is just really high in the wintertime if you're going 10 kilometers an hour too fast in there. And what have you found? Like you've been in it now over 20 years. You used to have paper logs. Now ELDs. What's your when it comes to keeping it legal? What's your philosophy on the ELDs?
I don't think I've been inspected since mine went in.
How long?
Pardon me?
How long ago was that?
Just this past spring.
Oh, that's the first time you went to your ELD.
I quit crossing the border before they came in there, and then it's been paper log here up until just this past spring. Okay. But I have heard from other guys who have been into scales that very, very rarely will any officer even look at the E-log. Paper log, they'd study it. E-log, they just assume, well, of course you're not up to anything because it would show up.
It would show up.
You can't assume that.
No. It is when it comes to technology, you can get around just about anything. It's like there is nothing that's secure. But I mean, for sure, that's does it slow you down?
Not really with what I do now, which is kind of one of my big complaints about it. I don't go any more than, I think the furthest destination I travel to is 260 miles away. Okay. So with typical shipping and receiving hours, it's impossible for me to break the law. Oh, yeah. Why do I have to spend money for a little electronic box that I don't get along with very well just to prove that?
Yeah.
In the US, when we used to run the US, I guess on occasion it would have been a nuisance, not because I was trying to break the law, but because I can't sleep in a truck stop or a rest area. It's got to be quiet. Well, we had a few customers that if you left this end, when you got to their yard, you were pretty much running out the book to get there. Mm-hmm. If you got a traffic delay, well, now all of a sudden it's going to take you 15 minutes longer to get there. With the E-log, you can't do it. You got to stop earlier in the truck stop or the rest area where you're going to lay awake all night. Mm-hmm. Or I could drive 15 minutes further and make it fit in the paper log and get a decent night's sleep, which I think means safer operation. But according to the people wearing suits that have never been in a truck, no, that's not the way this works.
Yeah. There is no I know some farmers, for instance, who have never really slept in the last 25 years, have never slept more than 4.5 hours in a night.
Yeah.
4.5, maybe 5 hours in a night. And getting them to go 10 hours in a bunk, they go nuts. Like those poor guys, they're up all night playing solitaire, because they can't sleep. Their body is just tuned to that. They can't do anything. They're used to working all the time. And some people's bodies just do not go according to technology. Like no. It has to something. I'm sure it's general enough so that the average person can do something, but realistically, there are some that will never fall under the 10 hours of sleep a night. That just their clocks just don't work that way.
No.
But I mean, that's where the industry is going. It has. I have talked to some guys, and we had a podcast on here a while ago, and where a guy was quoting a dispatcher who basically stated that one thing, once the ELDs did come in, within 6 months, they had virtually no grumpy drivers. They realized that everybody was getting asleep, and so there's a huge drop in grumpy drivers. I can see that on average, if guys were pushing it so that they were only getting 5 or 6 when their body wanted 7 or 8 or 9 or something, and they were always grumpy about something. But ELDs has quieted that down in there. But it's hard to change an entire industry when they have been working down a particular track, and then all of a sudden they have to really switch their gears, and their trip planning has dramatically changed. They can't do what they used to do.
A lot of drivers that weren't terribly ambitious in the first place, the e-logs became a really good excuse for them to not have to work so hard, because they would think of the one place just north of Toronto. I used to deliver hardwood, nice big yard. I'd go there the night before and sleep, and I knew what time to get up, start taking the straps off. You used to always have 3 trucks behind you by the time you woke up in the morning. After the e-logs, no, not anymore. And I mentioned to the forklift operator one day, why is there not so many more trucks here? Are you guys slowing down a bit? He said, oh, no. No, but he said, there's a truck stop like 8 miles away. He said, they used to park here, but now if it gets later in the week, they want to make sure they kill as much time as possible so they don't get sent out again on a Thursday afternoon. So he said they stop at the truck stop, and then it's 7 in the morning, whatever, fired up, drive here. Oops, there's 3 trucks ahead of me now. So I'm going to sit here on duty for 4.5 hours. Whereas before you would sit there and, when you were the next truck up, then you got ready to go. Then you started your duty cycle. He said they're just costing the company, 4 or 5 hours a week each truck of productivity by doing that.
Well, yeah.
And I don't really think anymore, at least, that people running a dangerous amount of hours over the limit was a problem. It's people that wanted to treat it like an 8 to 5 job. That's the big reason that the big fleets really wanted these, was so they could catch them in real time.
People want to do what they want to do when they want to do it, and it's. I don't think that's going to change in humanity. That's going to pretty much people want to do what they want to do. That's for sure. Okay, well, the next chapter, the CYA factor: document all audio, video, clean. Cover your ass. How much has changed in 20 years? Do you have video cameras on your dash, that kind of thing, or?
Oh yeah, I've had one for a few years now.
Yeah. That's probably the most widely understood CYA mechanism that's out there, because there's a lot of stuff that we're all exposed to, but there's other factors too, I guess. With
that, I was primarily into the paperwork side of it. Make sure you've got in the truck, make sure you've got every permit, every ownership, insurance papers, everything you could ever possibly need, and have it all in a nice, neat binder instead of just thrown together in an envelope with a paper clip. In case you ever get asked for it, hand it over. It looks like you're prepared. And keep every piece of documentation you ever get going each way. Take copies, file it. My wife used to scan every piece of paper she ever took in and save it to a flash drive, because with Canada Customs or Canada Revenue, if your office burns down, they don't care. If they want to do an audit, you better have all that paperwork. Well, we don't care that it was in the office. Where else do you have it? Well, she always had it on the flash drive. But a lot of people just...
Our firm went paperless in 2019, and now we have our own app, and where you just, with your camera or whatever, you take a picture of the paperwork and it goes straight to our server, like no email or nothing. It just works. It's a fabulous system, and you can every single scrap of paper you can just take a picture and store absolutely everything. It is great that way. It's absolutely, and it's away from where you are in the truck or whatever. You can't lose anything. It's all in the cloud.
No.
So and it in that way, paperless has been very, very beneficial for that, and they have access to it, so they can go online and find whatever receipt it is too, and look through everything that they've saved and everything too. That's for sure. That's it's absolutely it's needed more and more. How much have you fought with individuals that tried to uncover your ass, to say, and come after you? Like, it's no, you never delivered that, and then you had to produce bill of lading or something like that.
That sort of thing never happened much. The biggest problem we had that way was drivers pretending there was something about the load they didn't know. And that's why after texting got a little more common, my wife used to text everybody their pickup and delivery information. And then that gets rid of the argument really fast. If, well, I didn't know that. And she could run it up. Yeah, you sure did. Here it is.
Here it is.
Nothing, we didn't do anything verbal. If you did it verbal, you also backed it up with a text message. Or as far as loads not being delivered, I don't know if anybody ever tried that one that I recall. Had the odd one grumble about the freight rate and then say, well, you had, 6 months ago, you were given a chart of what your freight rates are. It was there. And then they can't really fight it. It's just, the days of the handshake are over. Everything's got to be documented and filed, and it's too bad. I think the handshake system worked pretty well, but I guess I'm showing my age when I say that.
Yeah, technology has replaced, to some degree, technology has replaced integrity, like a person's handshake, because what a person says sometimes doesn't mean anything anymore. But long-term wise, it will. Like a person's integrity will still carry them through the really rough times, in my understanding anyway, for sure. But yeah,
when we first started, you had very minimal paperwork in the truck with you, and filing system was pretty minor. Well, at that time we had line release forms across the border. Half the time you didn't even get it back. They just kept it, told you to leave. Now we have paperwork going both ways that we keep, and it's just so many things, whether you keep them in paper form or scan them, they got to be there.
yeah.
It's the paperless society for the trucking industry is actually an oxymoron. I think we've gone more the other way. Initially, like you say, you can scan everything and then chuck the paper, but initially we still generate, I think, more paper than we ever did.
Yeah. Sometimes we're trying to make a difference with our app. We're trying to lighten the load a fair bit. I used to keep every scrap of paper for everything, and it took me a good 3 or 4 months, even using our own app, for me to get into the habit of taking it. Okay, it's on the server. Hey, I can throw this away. CRA after COVID is much more receptive of digital than ever before. So, but anyway, so let's get into a real fun one here. Chapter 10, staff, the good, the bad, and the what. HR issues are nearly everything. Was my note on it. That means, I guess, hiring drivers and letting them go, and others, other factors in there too, eh?
Yeah. And that was probably one of the big reasons why our company didn't get bigger than it did, is because it just flatly refused to do what the big fleets did. I'm not going to hire you just because you've got an A license and a pulse and you tied your own shoes. There's more to it than that. I'm not letting our reputation be at risk just for the sake of having the wrong guy in the truck that I'm pretty sure is going to mess up a load or crash the truck.
Mhm.
So it really limits who you can hire. And I realize that limits the talent pool considerably these days, but it's still something. If we were hiring today, I'd still stick with it.
Yeah. Did you ever hire people who could really drive a truck well, but from a financial perspective, were a disaster?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How many?
we had,
What percentage of you that were troubled that way?
I'd say probably 30%.
Oh, 30, that much.
Yeah.
Uh,
And they were the guys that didn't have to fill out didn't have to make up a business plan to buy the truck.
yeah.
It was too easy for them. They never had to think about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're the guys you get the phone call from at 11 o'clock at night. I'm broke down.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we
Yeah.
let your customer know you're going to be late? Well, I need money to get it fixed.
Oh my.
You got paid 3 days ago. How do you not have money?
Yeah.
Yeah, the money management, that part of it was bad. And we also had problems when you mentioned guys that can drive. We had a couple of guys that put on their best behavior for interview day
Yeah.
and then just would destroy the equipment or argue with every customer from that moment on. They didn't last, but every one of them that comes through the door is just one less or one more piece of aggravation to
Yeah.
add to the list.
I guess when people are starting their own trucking company, and if they're exposed to the open market, people who don't have a job, generally there's a reason why they don't have a job.
Yeah.
And there's some quirk somewhere, and that's risky. That's for sure. The small trucking companies that have actually succeeded and done well, a lot of them relied on family and relatives to fill the trucks and to keep things going, because that gives us stability to a certain point, and then you of course run out of family eventually, but you can have a good strong reputation, and control productivity and service if it's run within a family and it's a good family scenario. But individuals who just hire off of the street, oh my word, talk about rolling the dice. You just don't know what you're going to get. And the famous last words is, "Oh yeah, I've known this guy for 3 years. He's a friend of the family, and he got screwed over there, got screwed over there, got screwed over there." And I'm going, the probability of getting screwed 8 times in a row are very low. And sure enough, 4 months later, the guys, I've had siblings take their siblings to the labor board, and I gotta give documentation for that. Can you imagine brothers and cousins or whatever going to the labor board? What a mess like that. There's a lot of assumptions, and when a person, especially if a person goes into multiple trucks and tries to build it that way, and put people in there, and they want to see a competent person in there, so that's all they see. They don't see the warning signs before they hire. And because desperate people do desperate things, and when you need somebody in a truck, you're desperate enough to lower your standards, and that's a recipe for disaster. That's why 9 out of 10 guys who go for multiple trucks, I mean, that's a different kind of own your own trucking company, but 9 out of 10 fail. And they don't fail right away. It takes 2 or 3 years for them to go from 1 to 2 to 3, and then down to 2, and then down to 1, and then 3 years to recuperate the losses that those few years had.
Well, there was a lot of reasons I did it, but we always leaned more towards owner operators whenever we could. didn't very often own any trucks other than my own. Part of that was, maybe if they've been an owner operator for any period of time, they have the financial skills. They're not going to need daily babysitting that way, and they're going to appreciate the fact of we pay percentage as well, so they're going to appreciate the fact of why we're doing this load in the order we're doing it. Or I thought when they had a financial investment, it would be more they'd be more apt to kind of work with you than the driver, because the driver, all he's got is his roadmap and his cooler, and is his only investment. Well, it just says one bad day and he can walk out the door. And if you have a company truck sitting there with no driver, I think in the book, again, keep in mind, it's 7 years old now. I said, that truck, just the truck payments and insurance sitting there with no driver, that can be $3,500 a month. It's going to cost you just to sit there.
Yeah.
I don't even know if 5,000 would touch that now. Whereas with the owner operator,
plus the license and insurance, if you,
so the owner operator, at least all you have is a trailer, sitting dormant, and you may need it for spare once in a while anyway. It's not that big of a deal. It just, to me, when you're starting off with limited finances and trying to grow, owner operators seem to be the way to go, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah.
And with the newer equipment getting less and less reliable, I really like that theory now.
For sure. All right. Yep. And you've never had staffing issues when it comes to in your house, because your wife did all the accounting and stuff like that, I guess, eh?
And by the time she had a helper in the office, we actually had a separate office. We had a piece of property with a repair shop and a parking lot at the back and an office at the front. But no, there's never ever been anybody else in the house. It's been in an office.
A lot of the smaller carriers, there's amazing amount, the guys, the dispatcher, the mechanic, and the woman, and dispatcher, mechanic, load broker, everything, licenser, and the wife does the bookkeeping and the billing and the stuff like, it's amazing. I bet you 60-65% that's exactly the format that a lot of the 15 plus trucks or 15 less trucks, that's the model that they have, and it works. It's a very low administration field to be in, for sure.
Well, we only had, like I say, at the peak, we only had 9, and then it went down from there bit by bit. But at that point, she needed help in the office because we were doing, before those trucks, we're doing just day trips.
Yeah.
And everything else was going a 500 or 600 mile radius almost all of the time. So every truck, there was one load to bill, to invoice every day.
Yeah.
And
when
fuel tax and
local,
everything else.
when you're doing more non-long distance, there's a lot of turnover of invoicing, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
That's way more work. Depending on the distance that a truck travels, the most that one husband and wife in the office can do is 25 to 35 trucks. Anything above that, then you start having to hire maintenance or hire administrative help and overhead. But a lot depends also on how far they travel too. If you can dispatch one of those 25 and he's gone for 4 days, then that's a little bit different than every single day. You got to keep those things rolling. That's for sure. So, but anyway, that's it is. Okay, the next chapter, keeping customers, defending your customer base. We touched a little bit about this in some prior chapters, but like I was saying before, the vast majority of all freight, new freight that's out there, is actually somebody's old freight.
Yeah.
And you're just, it's the industry of stealing, I guess, each other's freight. Now, that I think a lot of that is the larger carriers are stealing each other's, because the specialized freight, not specialized freight. That's the wrong word. The guys who have honed out really good customers, and they got a great relationship, and they're keeping a really tight service on those customers. There's less turnover in there than there would be in the much larger freight. Where you're bidding for the mail run or something like that, and everybody is down to cents per mile, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's a mass service situation. But smaller carriers tend to focus on a few good customers. Like I know one guy who started a small carrier, and he had one customer was the primary that did 60% of all of their the freight, and the backhaul was just from load brokers. So they serviced this one customer and went out, and then backhaul was it. And that's all they did was just, and so all they had to do was basically keep the one customer satisfied. And that's really, really safe if you can do that. But you have to attach yourself to a company, whatever that is, whatever company is. I think if I remember right, it was a cabinet manufacturing shop or something like that. So you just served with that one, and then he does LTLs, and it does that. And that tends to be the smaller carriers. And I think he ended up being like 20 or 25 trucks or something like that. But anything like 10, 15 trucks or less, they tend to focus either on one industry or one customer or a small group of customers. That's a lot safer, I think. There's a much more personal relationship there that way. But
to a point, we had one local company that at one point probably amounted to 75% of our outbound freight. Worked really good when the president of the company was still kind of overseeing what was going on. And then he started to sort of semi-retire, and things changed because the manager had other ideas. And then the president of the company actually passed away. And within 3 months, for all intents and purposes, we were out of there.
Oh, yeah.
Because his attitude was, I know we can get cheaper trucks than yours, but I don't care because you take good care of us. I don't have customer complaints to deal with. That's what I want.
Yeah.
Well, that idea went out the window as soon as he was buried. It was all, well, these guys will work cheaper. Can you match it? No.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it.
Yeah. That's they're definitely like you see it's not just in the trucking industry. It's like that. Like when there's management changes at various different industries, entire things can just swing.
Yeah.
And you just like, it's new. It's a free market. They can do whatever they want. They can make all the mistakes they want, and they'll pay for it. But I mean, it's a free world. It's a free country. It's a free market for sure. That's
all along for the 11 or 12 years we worked for that company. I just, anytime there was somebody nipping at our heels that was going to do it cheaper, I would say, yeah, I don't doubt they will, but are you going to get the service out of them? And that's with your clientele. That's really what matters. And a lot of the time they would see the light, or other times they'd try to use the other guy and he'd cause nothing but trouble with the customer. And then you're back again. You might get a couple months where they don't use you much, but you always went back.
Yeah.
Until that one guy at the top of the ladder, till he was gone, and then everything changed.
Yeah.
And
that's one thing about when freight rates get really soft, and having that good strong relationship with keeping customers, and good strong relationship that weathers you through the bad times, and that's one thing that's one, I guess you could say, luxury that large carriers don't have as much. They try probably, maybe they promote themselves as, but larger carriers is very difficult to provide that customized service sometimes.
And
There's
missing the
a whole
personal
page
side
for
of it.
everything. What was that?
They're missing the personal side of it too. If you got a big company with 1,000 trucks and 4 salesmen, they can't stay in constant daily contact with the shipping staff or the president of the company or whatever. And
too much of that eventually just gravitates to price, 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 price.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of being low cost producer.
Yep.
Like that you don't want to market yourself as the lowest cost, because that's not where the margins are.
No, we that was part of that chapter was just you got in there by promising good service. Keep up the good service and be ready to justify that good service at any moment.
Yeah.
Like we talked earlier about fuel surcharges. That one customer once called me up wanting to know how I arrived at the fuel surcharge. So I spelled it out for him, and then I gave him a sample freight rate to a sample destination. I said, here's a place, it'll burn 100 gallons of fuel to get there. And here's what your freight rate was. Here's the fuel surcharge. Now, if you take that over the freight rate, you can see that all I'm doing is paying the extra fuel bill. I'm not gouging you.
Yeah.
And eventually they listen to stuff like that. They like to think sometimes that because they've been hiring trucks for so many years, they like to think that they're almost a member of the trucking industry. And every so often you got to gently remind them, no, you're not. You're out of your league here.
For sure. Things for sure. All right, next is actually one of my favorite topics. Actually, I wrote a chapter of it in my book, load brokers.
Yeah.
That's an industry I feel grossly underqualified to talk about, but everybody's got an opinion, and I'm pretty competent in my own opinion. I believe I know what I'm talking about. I've had friends, not close friends, but good friends that load broke on the side, did some load brokering on the side. And it's amazing with just a telephone on a coffee break in the washroom, how much money they can turn over in their and there's no liability issues in there. They can disappear tomorrow. I know a number of years ago, Canada was known for really bad load brokers, and we had to clean up our act because there was so much crooked stuff going on. I haven't heard anything probably for about 10 years or so, but there was a lot of just flat out ordering, doing it, and then pocketing the money and try and find that guy's phone number ever again where you own it, and our country was very much a fly-by-nighter view, especially from the United States. And I guess to some degree we've cleaned up our act, or we've been distanced by a market, and only select people are trusted here in Canada. But load brokers, do they now not have to go through some sort of a qualification process? Don't they have to be certified? Don't they have to be bonded?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
The one of the few that we dealt with pretty regularly said that he had to actually put up a bond in case he did just shut the phones off and swing the door shut. Then whatever freight was out there, the government could cover for it.
Oh yeah.
We had a few that we dealt with pretty regularly because you learned you could trust them. They were above board. And you learn pretty quickly which ones are just weasels and avoid them at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a client that started a number of years ago, started his own company. He's been very, very successful. And he said the first year and a half was brutally difficult because there wasn't a single load broker that would trust you.
Yeah.
They paid you way late. All the terms or whatever was way out there because they didn't have you didn't have any track record or anything. But after 2 years of being consistent and ethical and solving problems, you have to gain your own reputation so that load brokers can trust you.
Yeah.
And it's vice versa too. Like, I mean, you don't just phone up a load broker and say, "Oh, I'll trust you for $5,000."
Yeah.
That's like it's rolling the dice again. That's it's a scary industry. But because one thing that load brokers can do is talk sweet talk. They're salespeople. They are smoother than silk, and I admire that kind of talking sometimes because really get, they can sell me a chunk of ice in winter, and but I'm not feeling very comfortable. I wouldn't expose myself too much to it, I don't know. I've never really had. There was one time for probably about 25 years ago. There's one time for probably about 6 months that I thought, hey, you know what? I'll start my own trucking company, and but it was the load brokers that scared me more than anything. And I thought, dang it takes a long time to get to know these guys,
Yeah.
And the only way to do it is talk to somebody else who knows this guy and has been working with him for 2 years. And do you trust him? Yeah. How do you do it? How do you get around it? And it's so much reputation of word of mouth, and but you never really know what these guys. Have you ever met these guys? Shake their hand. They're all in the. You never know if they're in the basement somewhere, with a cardboard card table as a computer, a laptop on a card table kind of a thing. But there are some reputable ones for sure, some very large ones for sure.
The ones that I have no patience for are the ones who offer me my own freight. There'll be some place that ships 50 loads a day. They'll call me up and offer me a load of that freight. Well, the only reason you have it instead of me is you beat me to the phone. Why would I show up for a load that paid, say, $1,200? Why would I show up at the shipper? Because I know that's what it pays. Well, now I'm going to show up and haul a load for you. They know I'm not getting $1,200. So now I've established that I will work cheaper. And just the principle of it. You're not offering this customer anything. You're just cherry picking. And I don't have a lot of respect for those kind of brokers. But
yeah, most load brokers are also they're also associated with another trucking company.
Yeah,
like almost all trucking companies have associated load brokering companies too. So there's so much conflict of interest but that's the industry. That I can't see anybody getting around that. I don't know where the industry is going. I think there's always going to be load brokers, and there's always going to be load brokers coming into the industry and going out of the industry, buying up, consolidating, all sorts of different things.
You can't really do without them because you haul to different locations sometimes that you've never been before and never will be again. There's none of your regular customers, have any freight in that area. You can't rely on them. You got to get home somehow. So that's the load brokers are always going to have a service to provide, just finding the ones that are above board when they do it.
Yeah. I guess the only other industry that wouldn't use load brokers is if you're tied to a particular company.
Yeah.
Like if you haul specialty, some sort of specialty auto parts or something like that, it's loaded one way and empty back. You know, I used to haul boats, for instance, you know, and it's loaded one way and empty back because
Yeah.
you got a specialty trailer, you got, you don't have much flexibility of anything like that. So it's just one, or you don't need any backhauls or anything like that. Grain hauling is a little bit like that, where it's just sort of one way. Well, no, they get backhauls, I know, but some industries are can do without load brokers, or minimize it. But that's one industry that it really helps an operator who gets his own running rights and he's got one truck. If he ties himself to one load broker, it's a good load broker, and then it's sort of like they're operating a little trucking company that somebody just finds the freight for them, you know.
Yeah.
And if it's a decent enough load broker, and there's a good solid service and rate there, they can keep alive for quite a ways. That's for sure. Yeah. So anyway, then the next one is enforcement. How much experience you have with enforcement? Drivers equals contact with enforcement. DOT. Has enforcement changed anything in 20 years? We talked about that they're maybe not as educated as they were years ago.
I think they're like every other sector right now. They don't have enough people either.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of bad operators that are getting away with it, not getting caught because there's not enough officers to catch them.
Yeah.
We used to be kind of blessed in my immediate area. I guess we still are. All the MTO officers here, every last one of them was a former truck mechanic.
Mm.
And they knew what they were looking for.
Sure.
And they got to know very quickly just by checking out your equipment that, well, these guys are a waste of my time. There's nothing wrong. And that was the end of being bothered. But other places you go, it's, the officer could have been delivering pizza 3 weeks ago. I mean, he knows nothing about the trucks. All he knows is what he learned in his little DOT course, which always kind of bothered me. You have to serve a 4-year apprenticeship and write your mechanic's license before you can sign a safety, but they take a 4-day course and they can condemn it. How's that work?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, you got to be nice to them or they can turn the screws and there you sit.
Yeah.
I was just very, very diligent with maintenance. I really wanted it so that on any given day we could get pulled over and they'd find nothing.
Yeah.
We used to, even with the owner operator equipment, we had a key to everybody's truck. And every so often bring it in the shop and have a look at it, just in case they're not taking good enough care of it, because that's our operating authority they're working under. Just get a look over it. If it needs something, tell them. And if they don't really seem willing to do it, well, you're going to do it or you're not getting dispatched until you do.
Yeah.
And the biggest, it seemed like a really bad price to pay at the time, but it had to be done. Probably the best worker we ever had, owner operator, and the whole time we were in business, we had to let him go because could not or would not keep a legal logbook and just wouldn't take care of his truck. It wasn't brand new, but when he got in on Friday night, he just out of the cab and gone. And the next time he came near that truck was Sunday afternoon to leave, and his pre-trip consisted of, did it start? Oh, yeah. And he started to get in a lot of DOT trouble, and it hadn't got to the point of being a problem for our operating authority yet, but if it kept up, it would have been.
Yeah.
And you just couldn't convince him otherwise, so had to let him go. You got to make that choice. Do you want to get in a lot of trouble for keeping that guy here, or do you just want to keep your record clean? Because the record stays with you forever. He might quit next week. Yeah,
exactly. It goes by the running rights. It doesn't go by it goes a little bit by the truck driver now too. It can go on the drivers, but it definitely goes by running rights as well, for sure. Your score.
But yeah, we did a lot of repairs, maybe earlier than they needed done. I deliberately avoided extra lights on anything, just whatever they come out of the factory with, that's all it got. Because if they're not there, it doesn't matter. They're not going to burn out. It's
Yeah.
not a something to catch their eye. Just tried to keep everything clean, in good shape, and stay on the good side of those folks.
Sure.
Then yeah, don't show up at the border and with partial paperwork or paperwork that hasn't cleared yet. You don't have an entry number. That gets them fired up. Just anybody with a badge, try everything in your power to keep them happy. That's just the policy.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Even in our industry, best relationship, we just want to keep as great relationship with CRA as possible, just keep it, it's just business and numbers. And it's all self-explanatory, or trying to. So nothing emotional, nothing personal. It's just, keep her going. The next one is my, I like this. I like the title, penny pinching. Not how much you make, it's how much you keep. And that, I think that is because it's so easy to grow a trucking company, people can get really seduced by large numbers rolling through your account. And it's deceptive sometimes what you're making and what you're not making.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. It's you got to watch the pennies, because that's where the money is made, really, much more than anything else, especially in really tough times. Did you ever keep track of fuel economy? No, you didn't have very many company trucks, eh?
Didn't matter. We were getting odometer readings and fuel receipts for the owner operators anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually told owner operators before, you need to get that truck in the shop and see where your fuel mileage went.
Oh, yeah.
And some of them hadn't even noticed that they were spending more.
Yeah, terrible. One of the terrible things about the independent operator industry is 50% of all operators don't even look at their pay statement.
No.
They just look, oh, this is how much deposit. Yeah, that's about right. Just no details. No. I had a client here, and I said, so he says, where do you make money? What do you make? And I says, well, so what is your running costs? Well, what do you mean by running costs? I said, what's your fuel cents per mile cost on your trucks? He says, how do you calculate that? Unbelievable. And so I mean, walk them through it, but that's one thing that I'm trying to help independent operators by creating a system that has those numbers immediately presentable, so you can just it'll be able to factor it out and put it out there right away. And but 50% don't look at it, and if anything, I would like to get that down to 5%. And that would make a huge difference, because they're thinking through some numbers. Because there's a lot of guys who get into the industry and they're just playing, they just, let's see what happens. And it's not just as an independent operator that's happened. Guys go out and they get their running rights too. And they say, hey, you know what? I'm going to cut out the middleman and go straight to the customer. And they still don't know how to calculate cents per mile running. And they do things approximately in their head when it comes to maintenance or something like that. Well, it should be that. And then something happens and they're not quite prepared, and they blow it out of proportion or something like that. And understanding numbers and finances, you have to know the numbers of the truck that you're working with.
Well, the one thing that you touched on in your book too, you used to see guys I'm really dating myself how long it's been since I crossed the border, but we'd be coming up through Indiana and they'd say, "Oh, I gotta fuel up here." Why? Well, it's only $2.60 a gallon. It's $3 in Michigan. Not that easy. It's the Michigan fuel is actually cheaper, and they'd argue with you. It's like, no, dude. There's surcharges. There's other taxes. The pump price means nothing.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things.
I am working on a podcast just on fuel costs, and I had one guy lined up, and he has one of these spreadsheets that he calculates everything down to the penny, and those are the kind I want to sit down and say, okay, how do you make this? Let's go on a trip, and how do you make your choices on there? And he would have been great for a podcast, but he was too shy. He didn't want to go on a podcast. And I go, oh man, all the good ones are just quietly in the corner doing a great job. And it's the guys you got to really watch out for who are talking, and they talk up a great storm, but they don't know what they're talking about.
No.
That's unfortunate. But that's true.
And arguments that I've been getting in with people lately is they think they're saving money. We'll think of one company specifically. They buy these rubbish trailer tires. I think they pay $2.80 a piece. They say, well, look at the money we're saving. I said, no, you're costing yourself money. Well, how can you possibly say that? It's only $2.85 a piece. The name brand is $600. Yeah. And the name brand will last more than double the tread life of the cheap one. If you factor, even before you factor in re costs, the more expensive tire is actually the cheaper tire. The cheap tire was cheap today. After today, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And same with brake lining or brake drums or anything like that. Belts, oh, it was cheaper. It was 10% cheaper. Yeah, well, the life expectancy is 40% less. You didn't save anything. You cost yourself money. Yeah. You got to watch that you don't save yourself into bankruptcy. Like
that's a tough. The longer I'm doing these podcasts and talking to guys who are good operators and stuff like this, the more I realize that you have to have some basic good sound knowledge of either maintenance, really know what you're doing in maintenance, or a combination of maintenance and finances. It's best to have them both, but you need to know where your dollars come and go. In there, it's saving. I have a couple of guys in the oil fields making 150, 180, sometimes 220 a year, and after 10 years in the industry, they're no further ahead than anything. They have unfortunately squandered unbelievable amount of money. They got they've, after 10 years, they're on their third truck, their second home, they got a cottage and a bass boat and and a jacuzzi, every kind of payment you can, all on financing, and it's just it's squandered away. And then I have some guys who never make more than 40 grand in a year, and after 10 years their house is 3/4 paid for, and they everything is holding together, and they keep it up, got a little bit in retirement, that kind of thing, very much money conscious. Sometimes people get into the trucking industry, whether they're independent operators or even get their own running rights, and think, well, now it's going to save me from all of my bad decisions in the past because I have much higher cash flow. If you can't manage the small stuff, you're only going to make a big problem with the big stuff, with the big numbers, that's for sure. Keeping it is huge. I always worry about clients when they buy a brand new truck and then 4 months later they have a big brand new dually half-ton truck and oh man, oh, see you in about 8 to 24 months, and bouncing checks here and there, and oh goodness. But they don't see it. They don't see it. You got to wait for a year, and then suddenly the eyes, and then they sell the truck, or then they downsize, or then they say, "Oh, there's no money in the trucking industry," and they leave, and stuff like that. You gotta know your industry, and
Well, it got us, I think, helped get us through the recession. I mean, my wife found a lot of things being done in the administrative end that we thought we were doing pretty lean. She found more savings, and just the amount of money that we saved doing our own minor repair work. Like, if you got to go in someplace and pay 110 an hour for them to put a pigtail on a tail light or an oil change, or the money you rack up in a year that just, I know you put in a full week, you're tired, but put in another few hours and do that yourself and save $600. A lot of guys don't want to do it.
I agree, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be an independent operator, and it's even more work to own your own trucking company.
Yeah,
there's so many moving parts. It's like you're juggling everything all at once. That's for sure. So anyway, next one, and we've touched quite a bit on this one already. Maintenance industry standards are defined by large carriers, not small.
Yep.
Was your point in there? And maintenance, how much has changed in 20 years?
I think with the big fleets, it's got even worse.
Yeah.
Because they know they don't get any engine life anymore, so they buy a brand new truck and with synthetic lubes. And I've heard of some fleets, I'm not making this up, that truck will get an oil change and a grease job when it comes in to get its annual safety inspection. That's it, because they don't have to care. They're going to flip it in 3 years anyway. Let the next poor fool worry about it. And which is why I always tell people avoid buying power units from big fleets, because you don't want it by the time they're done with it.
You're not the only one saying that. I was talking to a maintenance guy. We had a maintenance, what I call maintenance goat. I was talking to him. And he said he would never buy a truck that came from a fleet.
No.
I understand.
Like myself, not the truck I have now, the one I had before that, I bought it when it was 5 years old. I kept it for 16 more. You're not going to keep it on the road doing that with it.
Well, it's in my second book, I talk about the contracts of independent operators in 1996 versus 2012. So it's 16 years difference between carriers, and realistically, the margins have changed a little bit, but the bottom line point is independent operators, or people, really don't make a whole lot of money in the trucking industries until their truck is paid for.
Yeah.
Then you start getting 60, 80, 100% return on your investment. And you got to hold on to that thing for as long as you possibly can to squeeze a good ROI out of your truck. And that's the industry, and it's not changing, and it's only getting more so now.
Yeah.
And that, especially when you have a $180,000-$200,000 truck, and you only want to drive it for 3 or 4 years, and when the warranty is off, trade it in. There is no equity in that truck.
No.
So whenever you put $30,000 down on it initially, that there is no return on that investment at all until probably the last 4 or 5 payments on the truck, or maybe 6 or 8 payments on the truck, there starts to become equity into it. But maintenance is the only thing that propels you into the profit arena.
The other problem, and you mentioned about, you got to run that truck till it's paid for and then run it some more. I know a lot of guys get in a bad habit of, well, great, I have no payments. Now I can buy the jet ski and the pickup truck and the boat. No, because you're going to have to replace it eventually. Put some money aside, and your big ticket items for repairs are going to come up that you haven't had to deal with yet.
Yeah.
Engine, transmission, whatever, body job, whatever.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, for
not
sure.
a lot of willpower with some people.
Yeah, you got to think long term. It's almost a career choice. You say, oh yeah, look,
Yeah.
I got a 15, 20-year plan here. Now, you can get around it a little bit, and in a lot of the industry, for instance, if you bought say a $30,000 truck and you ran it and it was a pretty good safety truck, I knew some carriers that had leasing programs, walk away leasing programs for it.
Yep.
And if you lucked out and you got a decent truck, and you had it paid for within 18 to 22 or 24 months or something like that, it's amazing how much equity you can build if you're a little bit lucky and you keep on top of things. But that still means you have to drive that truck for 5 or 6 years, and then after a certain point you can throw a match into it and burn it down and cash it in, and you should be okay. And some guys I can see making 80 or 100 grand in a 5-year time, if they know what they're doing with maintenance, and they know what to do. And that takes a special kind of talent. And I don't think anybody can do it perfectly. You have to have a good maintenance guy look at it, and as well as yourself, more than one eyes. Unless some guys are real, a maintenance guru or something like that. They you got everything from bumper to bumper. But staying on top of that, you can do exceptionally well. But I do know only of one guy who buys a brand new truck every 4 years. But that guy is out on the road 305 to 320 days in a year.
Yeah.
And he runs like crazy in the oil fields, has high margins. It's like, I think it's $8,000 a month payments on a truck, and it's a little risky. But even then, I'm trying to get that guy to instead of trading it off he trading it off every 3 years. I just get one more year out of it. Just one more year out of it, and he can make huge bucks. If just one more year, just 12 more months, and then he can light the thing and walk away from it, and he's over 100 grand ahead by that. But he's got a probably 12 or 15-year plan, but that's the only thing I would change in it is move it from 3 years to 4 years. But I'm not exactly sure if he'll listen to me. It's pretty enticing to get a new truck every 3 years, but he's just not building that wealth that he should be. A lot of effort, a lot of sacrifice, but he could be making way more just with one small tweak to the formula, But
there's too many people that are working for the truck instead of the truck working for them, and that's, for me at least, that's not what this is about.
Sure. Well, we've talked a little bit also on the next one, dealing with customers, and we've said customers think they know how to run a trucking company. You've mentioned that before on there. How do you deal with it and not burn a bridge? I guess you gotta watch out.
Occasionally I did burn a bridge. If a customer, you could see the signs that probably from what you had noticed 2 years prior to now, maybe they're going under. When you start asking around a bit and you start looking at their operation, okay, you are going down and I'm not going with you. Then you just sorry, can't help you.
Yeah.
Or the ones that pay you in 30 days and then magically it's 90 and no, we can't play this game anymore. And there were the odd customer that wanted us to take the loads that had to be delivered at a certain time. You had to schedule 2 days ahead, and you'd never get loaded at the proper time of day that you could be there sensibly. We had to have a bit of a comeuppance about that this has to change. If you want your stuff delivered at a specific time, you have to have me out of here at a specific time.
Yeah.
You gotta, there's a very fine line to walk. I don't think I did it properly very often, of making sure that they know they're important to you as a customer, but they're not your whole source of existence. You have other customers, and this is a two-way street. I'm going to give you service like you've never had, but you got to make it possible for me to do that.
Yeah.
And just stay
And
honest about everything.
sometimes there's a carrier, or sometimes there's a shipper receiver, and you're working well, everything's fine, and then they have turnover of staff, and you're dealing with somebody new, got an attitude, who used to drive truck, and now he knows more about your business than apparently you do. And they burn their own bridge, or it's working with people.
And you'll get the customer that goes broke at one location, starts up again somewhere else, and well, we've dealt together for 10 years. You're going to work for me over here, aren't you? No.
Yeah.
No, because I know how this is going to end. No.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's the chapter 17, associations. I bet you have some feelings on this. Canadian Trucking Association now actually has competition for the first time in 50 years, 40 years. They would have been in 80s, so that would have been 40 some years. They have the Canadian Truck Operators Association, which is primarily an association that there's a great deal of Asians in there. And from what I see, they are dealing with driver, the incorporated driver issue.
Okay.
And they support the incorporated driver platform, whereas the Canadian Trucking Association is flat out against it. And that is a contentious issue that has festered now for well over 3 or 4 years. And it's much more of an issue where you are in Ontario and East than it is West. Maybe on the West Coast in BC, they might have some more of it, but it's not in the prairies. It's not a huge issue for that. And like, let's maybe talk about the Canadian Trucking Association, because a lot of people don't even know some of the actual structure. Are you a member of CTA?
God, no. We joined the OTA for one term early on. And,
you automatically become a member of the CTA if you're an OTA, right?
Right. It's actually the same management team, or it used to be. The OTA and the CTA was the same management team. We joined thinking, industry inclusion, that's a factor. And there was a bunch of programs like a co-op. They were basically selling themselves to be like a co-op. You can get discounts on all these services. Well, benefit plans for the employees, that was pretty high on our list. My wife called, I don't know how many times, left how many messages, no response back. Finally got a hold of somebody to find out what we do to get set up for the, who do we contact to get into these benefit plans. And they gave us the number. She called, and the guy literally laughed out loud that, well, just because you're an OTA member doesn't mean you get any discount. Well, according to them, it does. And throughout that year, we kept getting emails. We'd like you to throw your support behind this issue or that issue. I think at that time it was speed limiters, and there was other issues. And I would email them back. Well, I obviously can't be at every meeting like some of the big carriers. In fact, I never got to a meeting. I relied on these emails to know what was going on. Tell me a little more about this. Nobody would ever give you any information. We just want your yes vote. We don't want to tell you what you're voting yes for. We want to know you support it. Well, no, I don't. So after 1 year, we just backed out of it.
Yeah.
And I found after that, there was a lot of kind of backhanded comments towards, well, and then they grew to the point they weren't even backhanded comments, to the point of basically, if you're a small carrier, you're the problem with this industry. Really? I'm fussier about driver selection. I'm charging higher rates. How am I the problem here? And it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way that an organization that's supposed to be, in their own words, representing this industry, no, they're not. They're representing enough carriers that they're representing the big ones, but it's less than half the trucks that are on the road. How can you say you speak for me? And then when we had the mandatory entry-level training meetings here in Ontario, I badgered the transport ministry for months to be involved in that before they finally hooked me up with the Ministry of Colleges and Trades. And they invited me to one of the meetings. And anybody that was high up in the management of one of the associations would get close enough to read my name tag and just turn around and walk the other way. They wanted nothing to do with me. And pretty grumpy about anything I recommended that this training program should have. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the head of the OTA and CTA about 5 years ago, maybe. He was on a Canada-wide talk radio station being interviewed. And he said, this is word for word, small carriers must be eliminated.
Oh, really?
He said, that's the problem. Well, that's a very bold statement for somebody that says he represents the entire industry. Yeah. So I had very little respect for the big operations at that point, and any little tiny bit I had left disappeared with that. You don't make statements like that.
Yeah, there's I've written for Over the Road magazine now for 14 years, and occasionally, I think probably 4 or 5 times in that time frame, I've taken a few shots at the CTA, and I try and be very polite when I do it and stuff like this. I get more positive response from shooting CTA than just about any other topic, because there's a lot of animosity against them, and then they promote themselves as if they represent 300,000 or 250,000 truck drivers all across Canada, and they did a little bit of a, how do I say this? I shouldn't say bait and switch, but they tried to take immense credit for the lunch bag letdown campaign. When the Conservative government came in, one of the biggest problems was the meal allowance was at 50%. And they wanted to bring it back up to 80%. That's what the Conservative government was doing. And they were prepared to do this. And when I wrote about it in my first book, but when the class action lawsuits failed, I think there was November or December, or no, November, whatever the months were, in 2006, almost immediately the CTA sent out the lunch bag letdown. We're going to get the government bring it from 50 to 80%, where it should have been. It should never have been down to 50 in there. And realistically, from what I understood, the government was ready to just say, okay, let's go from 50 to 80. But they were, maybe this is secondhand, but they were advised by the association that drag it out over 5 years and gradually increase it, and then that will quiet the drivers down, and you'll still get the credit for it. Which cost the truck driver in Canada, it would cost them millions of dollars, like collectively, in there. And there's a lot of things. There was another thing had to do with it seems that they really align themselves with the government, no matter what the government says.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I do, I appreciate their support on is that their stance that biodiesel in Canada should never be in tanks in Canada, just because of the cold weather and how biodiesel does it. Other than that, there's so much that they do that is really, it's more just a bureaucratic hindrance to the industry than it is actual benefit. It benefits a small segment of individuals, but the real industry is really neglected. Like I was a big proponent. I just get the heck out of the speed limiter thing. I thought it was a total waste of time, because if you go into the computers and you put it at 105, they're going to be able to go over this stuff how do I say? They're going to go around this stuff and make the computers say whatever they want to say. They're going to get around it, because that's how technology was. And the MTO is never going to be able to keep up with the technology. Like they hardly got enough to plug it in right now in there. And even today, like not today, but in the last few weeks, I drive down Highway number 1, and I'm passed regularly by Ontario trucks. I go 108, 109, and these guys go by 115, 118, and they're supposed to be limited. Well, we said that, whatever, it was 8-10 years ago when they brought this law in. It's not going to work.
No.
They play, and they play. And there's so many things that occur like that they spend unbelievable amount of time on and effort on, that brings so little value. There's much more things that can be done. I've seen some carrier contracts that really should be exposed, and the CTA say, listen, stop doing this kind of stuff, because you're totally taking advantage of drivers and stuff like this. They don't do anything about that. Like that, policing their own. No, that's not that. That's
it. I just think if you're going to be an effective representation for any industry, you better not be that cozy with the government.
Yeah,
it's just not right. You're not going to get the job done properly because you get along with them too well.
That's why actually I really like the Canadian Truck Operators Association, because it's at least competition to CTA.
Yeah,
and they're standing up for actual driver issues. Now, I still personally believe that the incorporated driver model only has a 20 or 30% chance of ever being sustained long term. Okay, so there's high risks involved in that. They would say absolutely not. There's 0% chance. No, in the end, it's going to be decided by the courts, by the tax courts, not even by Canada Revenue Agency. It'll be the tax courts that it's going to decide that. And CTA presenting themselves as if, no, this is absolute. No, that's their position, and I respect their position. They can have that position, but to imply that they know better than anyone else, than the tax courts, I think that they're grossly overstepping their bounds. I love entrepreneurialism. I love independent thinking. And the biggest thing that this Driver Inc. or incorporated driver thing deals with is over taxation and over bureaucratizing. You don't pay Canada Pension Plan, you don't pay EI, there's a whole bunch of things that you circumvent that some people don't trust the government. Especially like for myself personally, this was the first year that I stopped paying CPP. I went to a dividend system completely because any contribution to CPP, I'm not going to get any ROI on.
No,
because I'm too close to retirement. And so, like, I'm 60 years of age. I'm going to retire probably when I'm 70. But even if it be at 65, I'm not getting anything. If I'd pay the higher rates, I would get no ROI on it unless I get maybe not even past 95. But if I'm not going to live past 95. But it's bad. So why am I just throwing that away? So I changed my model to be dividend model. Well, if you are somebody who doesn't believe and you want to retire somewhere other than Canada anyway, and you want your CPP, or you don't want your CPP, you keep your own retirement plan yourself, and so you claim everything through dividends. That's the model that they've chosen. They said, I'm going to do Driver Inc. or incorporated driver, and that I respect their independence. I know that it's risky, and I know that they're taking on a risk from their own retirement perspective. But for the Canadian Truck Operators Association to back incorporated drivers, they have well over 1,000 members, and a significant portion of their membership use this system, and they said that we are going to defend this in court. And I'm interested to see what Canada that's what CRA is actually going to do. When you have a huge percentage of a particular industry that is doing something, are they even going to take this to court, or are they going to negotiate something out? I don't know. I think it's a certain type of a tax revolt, I think, where you just want your wages and you don't want the government to stay out of my business. I respect that. I don't.
Yeah.
I only do that now because I'm 60, but when I was younger, I don't think I would advise myself to do that. But I respect those who are doing it and say, listen, they want the government out of their life. Why not give them the freedom to have the government out of their life? And
well, if nothing else, a second major association. It's back to the competition thing. It's not all just the wishes of one organization.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, the CTA has all the big fleets. They've got so much money behind them. They're so well organized. It takes a lot to go up against those guys with what you want to lobby for.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about being a member. I was asked if I wanted to be a member. I just didn't see any value in it.
No,
I was associated with it. I know an awful lot of small carriers. I don't know one of them who's a member. Oh, maybe. I haven't asked, so it's not nobody's a big fan of them. Maybe they are a member, but I like competition, even in lobbying groups, and I'm not a big fan of lobbying groups, but conflicting lobbying groups, great idea. What about
Well,
OIDA, for instance? Do they?
I've never had much to do with those. I know some guys do around here. Anything I've read of them, I find maybe a little more militant than I would have liked to see on some issues, but
they're very opinionated. There was I respect some people doing it, but they run a lot through like the contributions, like that's and memberships and stuff like this.
yeah.
And I wish them all the luck, but I don't know. I think I can do just as well helping operators from my accounting business than a separate entity doing that. I'm not exactly sure what they all do. I'm sure
Well,
they're big in the States, aren't they?
yeah.
Oh, but the Canadian chapter is a little low. They weren't very well respected by the CTA for a while. I know some people at the CTA, not very well, but and they're nice enough people, but they're doing a job. That's
Yeah. And
Mm.
unfortunately, they have, I think, too much clout for one organization to have or have had till now.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's going to be changing. I think
yeah, and
with
that's a bad thing when you're only representing 47% of the industry to have that much power.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of
I know that
bad mouthing.
CTOA has already aligned themselves with some federal agencies, and so they do have a strong representation. Like they're in Canada, 17.8% of truck drivers are Asian. In Ontario, 25.6% of truck drivers are Asian. And in BC, 34.6 are Asian. So they represent a significant representation. And to have the CTOA there, I don't know. If I meet them in truck world in spring of 2024, I'll shake their hands. I like competition. It's good. It's good for the entire industry. Always is.
I'm just too cheap to a fault, but if you want money from me for anything, you got to show me something in return.
Value.
And
value.
Any of the associations here in Ontario, nothing there to offer me that I can see. And the CTA, like I said, is basically just the big brother of the OTA, so it's no different. If one's not going to do anything for you, the other one sure isn't.
There's other provinces like that don't appreciate the close ties that the OTA has with the CTA.
Right.
And they just think that it's all Ontario, and that's an unfortunate. Maybe it's true. I don't know that much about the industry. Maybe you have to be a member in order to see how much the prairies and the West Coast are ignored in the company. I don't know, but it's a lobbying group, and I'm sure they have. There was an issue, and I can't remember what the issue is off the top of my head, but I remember there was an issue that some federal transportation minister, they were going to implement something, and it was so ridiculous. Like, I'm thinking, what in the world? This guy doesn't even know anything about how to drive a truck. It was so bad, and that's unfortunate that in our political system we sometimes elect people who have no idea what they're doing in business. And suddenly, that some guy who's a medical doctor is doing really well, and then you put him in the trucking industry. Well, he doesn't know a half ton from a highway tractor, like nothing, And so you need to have a lobby group saying, oh, okay, let's maybe give you a few courses here on what how the industry works, you know. So I mean, definitely they're needed that way, but anyway, that's
But they need to be legitimately
yeah,
for the betterment of the industry, not for the betterment of their members.
yeah, exactly. Well, the second last chapter, the exit plan, build a legacy. I went through and I said, if you want to build a legacy or you want to build a trucking company so that you can sell it, there's a fair bit of guys I've talked to who says, yeah, I'm gonna build a fleet up to 15 and then flip the, you know, sell it for $500,000, million, whatever it is, and that's my goal. Their pure goal is to flip it.
Yeah.
And I guess admirable in some regards. The only thing is the real value, the true value of any carrier is the actual drivers, is the actual employees of the company. And suddenly, if you're selling employees, you can't sell employees. You at best rent them, you know. And I've seen far too many carriers over 30 years sell and then it is just trashed, you know, or it goes nowhere, or it implodes, or there is no value there. You can have a pretty significant 25, 35, 50 strong trucking company, huge turnover of cash, zero equity built anywhere, and it's going nowhere. It looks impressive, but there is nothing there. And that's I like how you presented, you know, good customer service, higher rates, be able to get a good solid niche market and serve your customer. That's the only way to really build value. But because the barrier to entry is so low, I don't know the future of just building a carrier and then flipping it.
In our case, you know, we were turning good revenue. Regular customers. Problem is older equipment and not a single customer under contract. They were all a handshake.
Yeah.
And in the grand scheme of things, for somebody to buy out, you're worth nothing.
Yeah. So to some degree, I guess you're buying yourself a job. But there are margins to be made. When there's good times, you can do quite well. And as long as a person, you know, squeezes the penny and you can build equity. But I think there's too many people out thinking, I'm going to build a big company and then flip it and sell it, thinking that there's value just because you have huge cash turnover. And I know a guy who built, probably is about 20 years he spent building. It was under his personal name. Like too many truck drivers, trucking companies are all named after their own ego. And he built and he had a bad day, and suddenly his entire company, he sold it all in a big building and everything, but there was no equity in everything. It just transferred over to this other company. And I evaluated both companies, and this, I would call it you know, maybe a C or a C plus company was bought out by a C or a C plus company, and it's nothing, you know, it just is shifting of freight over, shifting of small assets over, and occasionally you can do it, but you have to sell at the peak of the market somewhere. You have to find someone who's buying it. Like in the summer of 2020, what was it, 2022 or 2023, that there was huge rates. Can't remember. I think it was 2020. In the spring of 2023, there was huge. It was large margins. The great freight rates was everywhere. If a person would sell there, and you would find a buyer who would buy it as a premium, maybe you could do it there, but not in the trough. That's there's That's for sure. So
If you have some kind of specialty, or you've got fairly decent equipment, like fairly new equipment, or you have actual contracts,
yeah,
or if you're just a regular thorn in the side of a bigger carrier and they want you out of the way, that all those, like those three scenarios, you'll do well.
yeah,
But as far as, yeah, like somebody in the position we were in, no, we got more than just the value of the equipment, but it sure wasn't a get rich quick moment.
yeah, for sure. That's for sure. Well, finally, leaving a legacy of freight movement. That's what you've got a deep level of satisfaction after 20 years in the industry, where you've developed good relationships with people, good solid relationships, and you can hold your head high that you did it with pride. That says an awful lot, I think, in an industry. If you get the respect of your peers and saying, listen, we did well for the industry. I don't know. That's how else do people exit the industry? I guess bankruptcy is there'll be the worst case.
That's common some days, yeah.
Yeah.
No, just I think a lot of them just run it to the end of its course and then just sell off the equipment and walk away.
Or have
Unfortunately,
another carrier just take it over,
yeah,
take over the equipment and contracts and stuff like that.
it'd be nice to think after spending however many years building it up that it would be worth more than that, but that's not always reality.
Yeah, for sure.
I know a lot of them have just decided, our equipment's getting old, we can't get drivers. Depending on the economic mood at the time, people are trying to convince you should run cheaper. Then that's when it's easy to just say, no, we're going to sell everything off, shut down, walk away. It's at that point, what's the point?
Sure. Well, boy, this is a nice long one. Boy, we covered a lot of topics. Hopefully, I know it's been there's some people who are really toying with the idea of owning their own carrier, and it gives a good broad sight of an industry, in good times and bad times, all the way through, and oftentimes owning your own trucking company is romanticized,
Yeah.
And people think, oh no, it's a license to print money. It's a license to work hard. That's probably the thing in there. So,
well, my wife used to have the saying, people would say, oh, so you're self-employed, you pretty much work your own hours. And she said, yeah, as long as those hours are 24/7, that's exactly what you do.
Exactly right on. All right. Well, we're going to thank you, Bill, for
Thank you.
Time. I had a great time. I love talking about the industry and hearing stuff, man. I enjoyed your book, and I hope other people learn a lot about the industry and avoid some significant pitfalls that can consume 2, 5, 8 years of their life and needlessly and avoid some stuff. So thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you.
And
like I said in the book, if it scares people away hearing the hard reality, good. Saves you getting into something that you're in over your head and didn't realize what you're getting into.
Gotcha. All
But
right.
if you walk away thinking, well, that's not going to be as tough as he makes it sound, or as I thought, okay, give it a shot.
All right. Have a good trip.
If you want to learn more ways to become a professional independent operator, subscribe to this channel. If you want to support what we do, like, share, and turn on that notification.